Shalom lekulam, shalom to everybody. My name is Professor Simcha Goldin. As the director of the Goldstein-Goren Diaspora Research Center at Tel Aviv University, it is my great honor to welcome an exceptional group of speakers from Israel and around the world to take part in this online international research workshop on the topic Jewish craftspeople in the Middle Ages, objects, sources, and materials. I would like to take this opportunity to note and mourn the recent passing of Alex Goren, Zichrono Livracha, of the Goldstein-Goren family, who made the Diaspora Research Center possible, and in whose name and honor the center operates. Alex was a great supporter of the Jewish studies, Israel, and the center, a man of keen understanding and generous nature. He will be surely missed. The Goldstein-Goren Diaspora Research Center is dedicated to research into the history and heritage of the Jewish people and its cultures throughout the diaspora in all regions, and is part of the Lester and Sally Entin Faculty of the Humanities at Tel Aviv University. The center has three objectives. The first, to establishment, coordination, and cultivation of research projects on the history and culture of the Jewish people in the diaspora. The second one is promoting access to knowledge in the fields of research of the center for scholars and general public through the publication of academic literature and journals, and to organization of conference, seminars, and research workshops like this one. And the third is supporting young researchers in the field in order to encourage research continuity. In addition, we have the Melman Library at the center, and an extensive archive of materials on the history of the Jews in the diaspora operate under auspice of the center. Among other activities, the Diaspora Research Center provides grants to support research on the Jewish diaspora and holds conferences and research workshops like this one, attended by top international scholars, and publishes a range of original research and academic periodicals on the history and culture of Jewry all over the world. The center's home at Tel Aviv University places it within the Israelis' largest academic community. The participation of Jews in medieval European daily life and culture is common knowledge in modern Jewish studies. This event aims to present an interdisciplinary approach and discuss Jewish craftspeople in the Middle Ages, with particular emphasis on objects, sources, and materials. We hope to provide a forum for discussing many elements of this significant aspect of Jewish history. This event was originally planned to take place last year in May 2020 in Tel Aviv, but unfortunately, due to the spread of the COVID-19 virus, we have forced to postpone it, and eventually the steering committee decided to hold it in this virtual format. We hope that this workshop will be only the first of an ongoing series of events on this topic, and that we will be able to host the future ones in person at Tel Aviv University in Israel. The center plans to produce a volume of conference proceedings following this workshop, and I also wish to mention that the entire workshop will be recorded and the lectures will be made available through the center's YouTube channel at a later date. I am most pleased that the center, in cooperation with our researchers partners at the ERC project behind the elite Jewish daily life in medieval Europe at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, has been able to facilitate this event and provide such a forum. This event could not have been taken place without the enthusiasm of its initiators, my distinguished colleagues on the academic steering committee. Maria Stutzbecher from Jüdische Leben Erfurt UNESCO World Heritage, Andreas Leonards from the ERC project Behind the Elite, Jewish Daily Life in Medieval Europe in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Yosef Yitzhak Lifshitz, the Goldstein-Goren Diaspora Research Center at Tel Aviv University. And of course, the outstanding management of the center's administrative staff, particularly Adi Moskovich and Sarah Appel. I welcome this opportunity to express my thanks to all of them, as well as to our speakers and chairperson, the ERC project Beyond the Elite, Jewish Daily Life in Medieval Europe at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the Tel Aviv University Events Committee for their generous financial support, and to the audience for your interest in this important topic. I wish you all good health and a fruitful workshop. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, from me as well. My name is Andreas Lehnertz. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Martin Buber Society at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, currently working on my second book project about Jewish craftspeople in medieval Ashkenaz. I am delighted to welcome all of you to our 3-day virtual workshop, Jewish craftspeople in the Middle Ages, Objects, Sources, and Materials. This long neglected field of study is not only of great interest to me, but I am delighted to see the high number of speakers in our different panels and today's audience of currently 69 listeners testifies, I believe, to its importance. So much of scholarship on Jewish professional activity in the Middle Ages has focused almost obsessively on the Jewish moneylender. But indeed we know, and our program is a testament to the reality that Jewish men and women worked in a variety of professions during this period. For the coming 3 days, we will focus on Jewish people in crafts, since crafts are an essential part of these professions Jewish men and women had in the Middle Ages. When we look to the sources, references to Jewish craftspeople vary from city to city and kingdom to kingdom. Our workshop aims to gather scholars from different fields who work with an array of source materials such as written material or archaeological sources from different geographical areas from Northern Europe to the Mediterranean. We believe it is vital to get together to discuss Jewish craftspeople as a broad phenomenon, and we hope that this workshop will heighten awareness for this subject of research and allow us to refine our understanding of Jewish occupation and crafts in the Middle Ages. I wish to thank Professor Simcha Goldian of the Goldstein-Goren Diaspora Research Center at the Tel Aviv University and Rabbi Dr. Joseph Isaac Lifshitz from the Shalem College for organizing this workshop with us. And by us, I also mean my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Maria Stürzebecher from the city of Erfurt, on whose behalf I also speak today and who will lead the concluding discussion with me on Wednesday. I also wish to thank Professor Elisheva Baumgarten, Professor Yitzhak Ber, Professor in Jewish Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, whose postdoc I was lucky to be for 2 years in the European Research Council project Beyond the Elite, Jewish Daily Life in Medieval Europe, and from whom I have learned so much. Professor Baumgarten was so gracious to support us in co-financing this workshop. I also wish to thank all our speakers for agreeing to present the topics in this workshop and all of you who have agreed to participate as moderators, listeners, and in the fruitful discussions I know we will have. Last but surely not least, it is time to thank Mrs. Adi Moskovich and Mrs. Sarah Appel from the Goldstein-Goren Diaspora Research Center at the Tel Aviv University, who did so much to organize this workshop with us by taking care of all the administrative and technical details. Without them, this workshop would not have been possible. I look forward to the coming 3 days of exciting papers and fruitful discussions. Please write us all your questions in the chat box. Please also consider taking part in our virtual reception at the end of our last day on Wednesday via the webpage Wonder Me. We will send out links in the chat box during the sessions. Since a Zoom workshop cannot replace meetings in person, we try to make up for this by offering some form of online meeting in small groups at the end of our workshop through this WonderMe webpage. So with all that said, I will stop here. We have approximately 10 to 15 minutes more left, and we will continue at 10:30 sharp Israeli time with our first session chaired by Professor Elisheva Baumgarten. And in the meantime, the speakers may set up their PowerPoint presentations if they wish so. Thank you very much, and see you again in just a few minutes.
So thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. And thank you for inviting me to kick off the conference, as it were, with this first session. I want to thank the Goldstein-Goren Center for inviting us to be a partner for this conference, and to thank Professor Golden, and to thank Adi Moskovitz and everyone there for helping coordinate everything. And this is a conference pushed off since last year, from last spring. So I'm really glad that it's come to be and we're able to have this conference now. So thank you to all of you. And I really want to congratulate Dr. Sturzbecher and Dr. Leonards, Andreas and Maria, because I think that this conference is not just a conference. It's really a landmark point in a project you've both taken upon yourself over the past few years. And you've been promoting this project from place to place, from land to land, from conference to conference, in different ways. And you've brought this topic to the forefront of research and to the forefront of all of our awareness. How important it is to really understand the people who were part of medieval Jewish society, the way they lived their lives, what they did, and how much it can teach us about medieval Jewish life. So thank you to both of you for being so stubborn and really for consistently insisting that this is a topic we should all be talking about and thinking about. And I'm very much looking forward to the next 3 days together. And I guess the last thing I will say is that despite the fact that we're not gathered in Tel Aviv as planned last spring, it's wonderful to have people here from Australia, from all over Europe. And I'm assuming that later in the day, people from North America will join us. So that really is very special. And as someone who's been studying the medieval Jews for some time, like many others here on the screen, it's really wonderful to have all of us here together and to see so many friends, colleagues, people we don't know, who we'd like to get to know. So thank you all very much. So our first, and I think only talk this morning in this session will be given by Dr. Esperanza Valls-Pujol, who's a research associate at the Institut d'Estudis Montjuïc in Barcelona, Spain, working in the Catalan Jewish Studies program. In recent years, she has worked at the Historical Archive of Girona in the classification, study, and interpretation of the Hebrew manuscripts found in the notarial bookbindings of this archive. Her main area of research focuses on the Jewish Catalan world, with a special focus on science, Jewish loans, Hebrew Catalan manuscripts, and archival research. And she has published and edited several studies about these different issues. Hard to say it's one focus, it's really a tremendous expertise. In addition, she also devotes part of her academic work to editing a wide variety of collections and manuscripts in different places. She has organized international conferences concerning the study of Judaism in Catalan-speaking territories. She's organized cultural events and courses of various kinds. She also participates or has participated in a number of research projects, such as the European project Books Within Books, the Hebrew fragment in the European libraries of the École Pratique des Hautes Études, and of other projects at the University of Barcelona, where she's also the scientific coordinator. So I think with this introduction, it's clear to all of us that she's one of the most capable people in the world to speak to us today about Jewish craftspeople and the Hebrew manuscripts of the Girona Gniza. Esperanza, please, we're looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Elisheva. Good morning, all of you. And I'm going to share my screen. One moment, please. Okay. You can see the screen.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you. The Historical Archive of Girona in Catalonia preserves hundreds of Hebrew documents emanating directly from the important Jewish community of the city. It's the so-called Girona Genitza. The presence of Jews has long been documented in this town since 10th and 11th centuries. The Jewish community produced important figures in thought and culture, including philosophers, scientists, and poets such, Nachmanides. When the mystical and Kabbalistical movement developed in the 13th and the 14th century, Girona became its most important center in Western Europe. Most of these Hebrew documents were hidden in the bindings of numerous medieval notarial books. There are fragments of documents in Hebrew scripts and also in Latin characters or in Catalan aljamia or in Hebrew, which during the Middle Age were used to create hardcovers for the acts of notaries in Girona. These Hebrew fragments contain, on the one hand, exegetical commentaries, biblical and Talmudical and liturgical fragments, various issues of jurisprudence, and parts of scientific, literary, and poetic compositions copied or composed by the members of this community themselves. On the other hand, these documents contain an exceptional number of community records and administrative, commercial, economic, and private documents of the Jews from Girona and its surroundings. These Hebrew manuscripts, written mainly in the 14th and first part of the 15th century, are a very rare and exceptional historical, economical, and cultural source for the study of the Catalan, Provençal, and European Jews, and offer us a direct and exclusive information on the artisans and merchants of that community, often with written fragments of their handwriting, and traced as poorly documented in the Middle Ages as the Jewish buildings. The aim of this lecture is to present the typology of Hebrew manuscript fragments, the data, and some examples as a tool for the study of the medieval Jewish crafts in Catalonia, compared with the information that Christian documentation can offer us. In medieval Girona, the main craftsmanship activity was leather and textiles, especially the manufacture of woolen cloth, well established in 15th century, followed by the metal and construction buildings. Christian notarial records show the vitality of crafts in the city and its surroundings. In general, the trades of medieval Jews are difficult to study due to the lack of specific documentation, especially that coming from the Hebrew community. There are not monographic studies on Jewish craftspeople in Girona, only reference in other works and especially in artisans' relationships involving Jews, converts, and Christians, and almost none on Jewish artisans in Catalonia. This is for many reasons, because activities within the Jewish community were not well recorded in Christian book notaries, or because there is a part of the craft that is not economically relevant, or because Jewish artisans do not enter in Christian guilds, or because the notices are widely distributed in the large amount of Christian documentation that was generated at the time, which especially as far as the Jewish community is concerned, focused on recording economic transactions between Christians and Jews. For Catalonia, Anna Rick has studied more deeply the community of Barcelona, a community with a good number of workers and a variety of trades in which dominate skilled weavers and coral artisans. We also have some specific studies on notice from bookbinders, dyers, or Jewish artisans, workshops, such as the Jews who made the famous Barcelona gatots or Mazor Catalonia, studied by Kochman Appel or Dalia Ruth Halperin. The Christian documents that provide us information about these activities are specifically economic and mainly are notarial deeds. Employment contracts, purchase sales contracts of raw materials, and sometimes mention of the Jewish professions in loan acts, lending activity. It is a documentation with a formal, systematic, and organized. This allows us to know the mentions of trades and the obtaining raw material, if there is any Christian involved, and some parts of the organization of the work, such tasks, parts of the production, or the wage according to the category, the developer work, or the production, or the hiring of apprentice, and stipulated labor relations as well for some business, some associations or companies. But what does the Hebrew documentation of Girona provide us? On the other hand, the Hebrew manuscripts of Girona are a non-formal or systematic source and are very fragmentary, but richer in personal nuances, which can offer us much more diverse information, data of the less economically relevant trades, techniques, uses, or more specific details of the goods productions. They provide us with more personal and even more anecdotal information. In part, it is a documentation written by the artisans, the craftsmen themselves, or by the artisan merchants, or by community scribes, or by the communal treasurers. It gives us an insight into the day-to-day craftsmanship and needs of the medieval Jewish community. A documentation that we can rarely find for any other community. What typology of documentation we can find? What is the kind of text that allow us to work in our study? On the one hand, we have manuscript fragments of daily workshops. There are several fragments in which we find annotations of material cost, annotations of the clients for whom the craftsman works, daily purchase of material, work done, or weights of or amounts for works. In this section, the most interesting fragments are the building records, the construction records. On highly unusual fragment contains notes written by a Jew regarding the activity of his building firm. It describes plans for constructing a wall and a distance from an existing wall that must legally be maintained. This register also lists his daily outlay for materials, beams, stone, plaster, lime, the cost of materials and labor of the work to be undertaken on it. A room, a window, several ceilings for Belchon Benet, a lintel for Vidal de Becaira. This record is written in a mixture of Hebrew and Catalan with respect to persons and material, such the word guix, plaster in Catalan. The trades related to construction is one of the most interesting aspects of the Hebrew manuscripts of Girona. There are no previous studies that have addressed these issues because we have received little information. But we can find reference in the books of works of the cathedral that we find several Jews of the Girona community working in the building, no maneuvers. Other fragments not material cost, among other things, such as the subsistence payments, perhaps for apprentices, or the purchase of certain amounts of papers. On the other hand, we find community treasures, accounts, or scribe soferim, the sofer accounts. This documentation shows us the work of some artisans, especially the work that some builders had to do, as well as the cost of the work of the sofer or the cost of some artisanal products to supply the community. For example, an annotation to fix the floor of the synagogue, among other payments and service, such by paper or by stones. In another fragment, we find the annotation of the cost of works as diverse as fixing windows, welding columns, fixing holes in the Jewish quarter, buying a large stone, buying paper, buying white candles, buying beds, or paying for the sofer deeds. There are, in this documentation, inventories and account books of artisan traders. This is a group of fragments that provides the most information about the goods, about the products. Especially, there are annotations of handicraft articles related to textiles. Especially, you will inventory the quantity or import of the sale that to the people of the community. The most common goods are house textiles, such mattress in Catalan, matalaf, or blankets, flassada, or bedspread, banuba, or trousset, that is a medieval Catalan word that can translate for bundle of clothes. Another fragments contains inventories of textiles and clothing, provides another instance where many Catalan words appear in Hebrew script. Banubas, espuneras, cloth to cover side of the beds, typology of the textiles, listada, or colors of the textiles, blau, blue, yellow, grog. Also, we find inventories lists of metal products, such as pots on other containers. This is a fragment with remains of some accounting records of sales of various household utensils, garments, or ornaments. We have received part of a list with the name of each item and the price. It is a clean and accurate document, probably part of a much larger account book in which the merchant or the craftsman recorded the transactions he made. It draws attention, among other goods, the record of a talit that he sold for 2 salaries. Or in Catalan, others articles such almares, estam, aixa, broker, vesta, tassos, morter, citra, partides, cadell, conca, cosins, calçats, resora, sàbana, centrat. All metal products and pottery. We also have examples of inventories or lists in the textile sector, but from the work of tailors and other related artisans who write down the garments that they make or sell with the detail of the colors, garments, layers with fabric detail, for example, if it's mixed or listed or with cloth, furadada. Finally, there are another kind of documentation are the tax declarations. Community members who were engaged in lending money or other business were required to declare their earning weekly. Other types of annual taxes or on food and handicraft products were also required. There are many fragments of this typology among this documentation. However, in these internal documents, the professions is not indicated, but they are interesting because we can carry out a study of the annual earnings of some artisans whose names are known through Christian's documentations. For example, in the document that you can see in the screen, there is a document of the 1426, the annual earnings, and appear some artisans that we find in the Christian documentation. Other documentation are more special and allows us to know other informations or other aspects of the craft, such as those of an herbalist, or what you can see in the screen. One moment. A fragment with a drawing of Purim in Girona is the final text of Esther, which we can imagine that a craftsman perhaps made masks or garlands for the celebration of the festival. Finally, I want to take another aspect, the external material of these fragments, the book bindings. The fragments of Girona also give us information from the external aspect as a material legacy through the bindings of the notarial books where we found Hebrew fragments. In my thesis, I made a detailed study, historical, typological, and textual analysis of the study of Jewish book binding professionals, which for reason of time in this paper we cannot present, the codicological and historical analysis of the books and a systematic comparison and combination of data of book dates, manuscript dates that recovered from the book bindings, and archival reference that have come down to us from Jews and converted bookbinders. They lead me to think that much of the bindings was done by Jewish craftsmen. There would be two styles of bindings. The notarial books were found in the Hebrew fragments. On the screen, on the slides, you can see that there's two styles of recycling with two techniques of bindings. For one hand, these fragments inside the bindings, or with fragments of daily fragments of the community, or the second is the bindings involving the book with other kind of texts, biblical or Talmudic texts. The Jewish bookbinders of Catalonia, craft to which they dedicated themselves with a certain preference, use it for the binding sheets or all right books which will be deteriorated, or the remains of account notebooks whose annotations will have already expired, is the first case. You can see that the mainly the grip part of the recycling is in the years of the middle 14th century, and in the 5th century, the recycling there are not many fragments, and the fragments of the 15th century are especially are biblical or Talmudical, and in the 14th century are commentaries, text economics, text administratives, biblical text exegeticals, remains of others. That's it. On the one hand, the most important and the majority is the intervention of Jewish bookbinders. The office of bookbinder was common among Catalan Jews of the Middle Ages, and also converts are found in manuscript in many cities through the exercise of this profession, especially in Barcelona. They work both for Jews and for Christians, for private or public institutions, like the church or the notarials, as in this case. In Girona, at the time of this recycling manuscripts, the profession was exclusive to the city Jews and converts. Then we find him in the hands of converts, and for example, in Castelló d'Empúries, a city next to Girona, all the bookbinders are converted Jews. The Jewish bookbinders of Girona use for bindings sheets of old right books which will be deteriorated, or the remains of account notables. On the other hand, the second stage, we can talk of recycling because other historical factors, Black Plague or conflicts. However, this is not the most common cause. It is found especially after the expulsion or after the pogroms of 1391. This is evident with the recycling of biblical or Talmudical documents, but those are a small number of them. We can talk about the 5% recycled Hebrew documents. To conclude this overview, we can affirm that the manuscripts of Girona are a splendid source to know the crafts of the medieval Girona community and by extension of the medieval communities of the country. That with the combination of the Christian documentation, some of the archaeological remains found in the area of the Jewish quarters, such as handicrafts, jewelry, crockery, in some cases very specific to the community, fabrics, and remains of possible workshops, and the response study can offer a much broader look at this activity in this country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very, very rich talk. I'm sorry you can't hear the applause across all the oceans of the world now that you've finished. I have 3 questions that have reached me via the chat, so I will, do you want me to read them or do you want me to call on the people to ask? I should read them, Andreas?
I think you should probably read them, yes.
Okay, because I don't know everybody, so I don't know to tell you enough about the askers, but I'll do my best. So Magdalena Janosikova writes like this. What was the role of Jewish artisans in Girona in the greater economy of the city? Can we say that they developed a particular specialization? And if so, what were the reasons for this? So I'll let you answer that, Esperanza, and then I'll read you the next question, okay?
Mm-hmm. What's the role of the arts? We don't know many sources about this topic, and only can see some draws in the manuscripts, and it's not very studied. And for other hand, the other question is developed and specialization. I think one of the specialization is the bookbinders, and on other hand, for the quantity of the number of the manuscripts that shows some goods of textiles. The other specialization, it's possible perhaps a textile specialization that made textiles for other persons, that's such tailors, or for the home, that's for the bed, textile for home.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read the next question, which is from Nomi Fleshniger-Sarig. And she says like this: the impression is that most hidden Hebrew fragments served as binding for archival materials and less in book bindings, church ledgers, and the like. Is that correct? So do we find most of these Hebrew fragments in archival materials?
Can you repeat, please? I don't hear you.
Sure, I will read it again, or maybe Nomi, do you want to help me if I'm reading something wrong?
Bueno.
Nomi, maybe you can unmute and help a little bit.
Yes.
All right. First of all, thank you for this wonderfully rich material. I got the impression, maybe from you, maybe from other sources, that the large majority of fragments were found in archival materials and not so much in regular book bindings, in church ledgers, and I can't think of any other context. Is that correct? And if so, why?
That is correct for Carwell, but in Girona, all of the most part, are inside of these book bindings. Okay, but it's correct.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Sylvia Stern. I'm going to try to transmit it, and if not, Sylvia can help me. And she's interested in the structure of Craftspeople's association. And she wants to know what kind of associations there are in competition with Christian producers. And she's asking to the extent, to what extent there are what Avner Greif called commitment devices, when membership corresponds to the benefits occurring to the members' rationality. So she's asking, and I'm asking for her, she's asking to what extent we have competition and how Jews organize around that competition, both among themselves and with Christians. I hope I did that okay, Sylvia, and you can add anything I didn't say properly.
Well, they are not very noticed about this aspect, but in Jews that their activity are the lending activity, the Hebrew documents show some associations to distribute the business in various parts of these countries. But as the competence are not shown in this documentation, and there are not any study of this that carry. We know some of Jews that work with Christian artisans in workshops or with sales, but there are not many informations about this topic.
Would it be fruitful to look at the contracts, that is craftsmen's contracts to form an association, if there is documentation on that is to form some kind of a mutual responsibility unit, or to peer pressure to guard the quality of production to become more competitive? Or you mentioned several sources, and I'm truly impressed. But did they also learn from entrepreneurs kind of a trial and error method, what I calls that is that's from entrepreneurs that enjoy high status in the community, to use them as role models for example, market ethics, application, and so on? If there is any evidence of that, that is, and I'm simply interested in this question because I want very, very much, that is concerning the 19th century challenge Max Weber's postulates on Jewish pariah capitalism. So it is interesting to me in which way there was some kind of recurring or repeated capitalist behavior that had been based or anchored in reputation in the community that rendered pariah behavior unwelcome or rejected. That is, if the reputation in community played a high role of craftsmen, of good craftsmen, or skilled craftsmen, or heads of craftsmen associations.
It's possible. Yeah, don't have very well you.
This is not the material that you looked into.
I don't have very well this.
Okay, so here we have a direction for future research. Do you want to think about this from Esperanza, or? Okay, so I think the next bunch of questions have to do with, there are quite a few of them, so I'll try to kind of group them together. And one question is, somebody asked if they understood correctly, anonymous question I got here. Did they understand correctly that there were Jews who were building, who worked as builders, and specifically in building the cathedral? Is that something you said? Is that what you said during your talk? And if yes, could you provide more information about that?
there are only some reference in the church about the Jews working, and only with working with the stones, or working with how como how brick layers, but not, but only are scattered. Okay.
Okay, the next question has to do, and this actually repeated itself in a few variants. Do we see that Jews have mainly Jewish clients and Christians have mainly Christian clients, or do we see really a crossover between Jews and Christians on the different levels?
I think it's a cross in different levels, but there are two stages. One stage of cross between Christian of Girona, or Christians from the surroundings of in Catalonia, with some specialist Jews, like the benders. And there are artisans, craftsmen, that only work or only have reference working inside of the community for the needs of the community, and it's possible that they don't work with the Christians of Girona, because in Girona there are guilds, strong guilds and strong associations of artisans that made the same goods, the same products.
Okay, so now there are two questions that are somewhat related. One question is, do we have any indication from Josefina Rodriguez, do we have any indication of metal craftsmanship in Girona? So did you find metal craftspeople?
Artisany, yes. There are some indications in the Hebrew manuscripts with the metal pottery, okay? But not, we don't have another informations working in a jewelry in the Hebrew manuscripts. Okay, but we have some remains, archaeological remains of woman jewelry in metal. Okay.
Okay, so then the more questions. Another one is, how would you compare between Girona and Barcelona? Do we see the same structures and the same kind of patterns of craftspeople, or are the two cities very different? In other words, to what extent is everything very local, or can we talk about larger regional similarities?
There are some crafts that are similar, especially the recurrent crafts, the textile, the leathers, the leather craft, the house goods crafts. Also, there are similar artisanate about the book bindings, but in Barcelona, there are craftsmen more specialized, especially working in the goods of coral, for the proximity of the port, of the sea, and the commercial and maritime business. And in Barcelona are especially also in the textile, in the silk textile. That in Girona we don't find this specialization.
Okay, that last question was Andreas's question. I'm sorry I didn't say that. And now we have a question from Maria, which has to do with something very interesting you were discussing, which just you noted right now in your last comments about the differences between what we see in Hebrew manuscripts and what we can see in manuscripts written by Christians. And she asked if we have any references to Jews in Christian guilds and in the documents from Christian guilds.
No. We don't have reference in the Christian Jews. Only we have in Girona and in Barcelona. So we have reference of the Jews working in a workshop of the Christians. That if are working in the workshops, it's possible that Christian, of course, Christians are working with guilds, not. But I think it's possible that these Christians that contract Jews are converts. Okay.
Well, that's really interesting. Okay, so there are two more questions, and I think we're going to take a break until the next session begins. And one question is from Saskia Donitz, which is, could you provide more information on Jewish professions with regard to leather? Because you mentioned leather at the beginning, but we didn't hear that much about leather. So what can you tell us about leather?
In leather, not in Girona. We don't have, in Hebrew manuscript, we don't have any information in Girona. The great information about working Jews in leather is in Barcelona. Okay.
Okay, and then the final question that I think we'll address is from Josefina Rodriguez, who asked, can you comment on the amount and kind of scientific texts that were recycled, and in which periods were texts recycled?
The text recycled, yes. There is no, these texts recycled are of the works of some proams of the some knowed personages, that Alfasi on others scientists, and for other hand, there are Hebrew fragments that contain some recipes, some medical recipes that were reused. It's two kind of fragments reused in this issue about the science.
Okay, so I think that finishes all of the wonderful questions we've had. I want to thank you again for your excellent talk, which really gave us a wide range of documents and professions to think about. There is so much more research to be done there, so it's very exciting. And thank everyone for participating and for sending their questions. The organizers have asked me to say that we will reconvene at 12:30 at the same link, and we will continue from there. And hopefully Jeremy Alouche will be able to speak on the final day of the conference, so we aren't giving up on his paper, and we will have the opportunity to hear it then. Thank you very, very much, Esperanza, for getting us off to such a good start.
Well, thank you. Bye.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm delighted to chair this session. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, Professor Simcha Goldin, Adi Moscovich, and Sarah Apple for inviting me to take part in this very important workshop about craftspeople, Jewish craftspeople. The first speaker today is Dr. Lior Jacobi, and the title of his presentation is Christian Books, Jewish Covers, Mudehar Bookbinding in Medieval Christian Iberia. Dr. Lior Jacobi researches and publishes on a variety of topics related to rabbinic literature and medieval art. In recent years, he has participated in academic conferences in Israel, across Europe, and in Abu Dhabi. He recently received a doctorate from Bar-Ilan University, supervised by Professor Daniel Sperber and Ilya Rodov. Lior will soon begin a Humboldt Foundation postdoctoral fellowship with Professor Andreas Lehart at the University of Mainz, focusing on medieval manuscripts, fragments of rabbinic literature in Girona bookbindings. Lior, please.
Thank you, Ilana. I apologize. First off, I'm a little bit hungover still from yesterday's Purim celebrations here in Jerusalem, Purim Mishulash. But I'll do my best. It's very exciting to be here, and I thank the organizers very much. So let's jump in. Is the screen shared for the presentation?
Yes, 1 minute, please.
Medieval bookbinders rarely signed their works, and their craft has received less scholarly attention than that of scribes and book artists. Prior studies on Spanish bindings noted that some bookbinders were Jewish as early as Henry Thomas in 1939. But the full extent of Jewish involvement previously proposed by Ramon Figueres and supported by my own research, and more notably by Joseph Schatzmiller and Colette Sirat, has not yet been taken into consideration fully. Arsenio Sanchez, a book conservator at the Escorial National Library of Spain, suspects that most Christian books in Valencia, Aragon, and Catalonia were bound by Jews, based upon his analysis of numerous bindings. Book bindings as objects of Jewish art have hardly been researched at all, with only one study known to me on a later Italian binding of a different type. This field is wide open, and I hope to engage with it in Catalonian and Spanish archives during the upcoming years. Next slide. My introduction to this branch of research began with Girona, where I've focused upon rabbinic literature extracted from medieval book bindings. I've had the good fortune to receive valuable assistance and encouragement from Esperanza Valls, and it's a great honor to participate in this conference this morning along with her. Her presentation has relieved me of the burden of introducing the nature of the bindings. I entered the field with a sense of zeal that I was restoring lost Jewish heritage which had been seized by Gentiles during the course of persecutions. However, exposure to Catalonian and Spanish scholarship via Esperanza and Mauro Pirani led me to question this assumption and to explore the matter independently from the perspective of Jewish law. Next slide. What exactly did the actual practice, day-to-day practice of the bookbinding crafts in medieval Spain or anywhere, what did it look like? We have little to go on here. There's very little evidence. Contemporary Spanish scholars have compared with later images of Eastern bookbinders, such as these found in the British Library. And I hope that pleases Ilana. Next slide. Here's another image of an Islamic bookbinder. How do we know who bound the books of medieval Catalonia and Spain? This is a difficult question. Most bindings were not signed, and no record survives as to who their creators are. Only the creators of a few of the more extravagant bindings for regal books have been noted. As to Girona, according to Albrecht, a Jew named Isaac Maimo bound most of the books between 1435 and 1449. And another Jew, Abraham Vives, bound most of the books between 1472 and 1488. These same Jews were listed on many documents as members of the Jewish community in documents published by Jaume Herrera y Sanz, the late great scholar. Next slide. As reported by Esperanza, about half of the fragments extracted from Girona bindings are in Hebrew. This high percentage in and of itself suggests that Jews were involved in the craft, utilizing primarily the worn out paper fragments which they owned or had easy access to. Although it's not a proof, this is certainly a supporting factor. Conversely, it suggests that we should expect that a relatively high proportion of the Latin fragments in this corpus also were owned by Jews, and that their contents address matters of Jewish-Christian relations to a relatively high extent. In fact, one such fragment with Latin on one side and Hebrew on the other was the topic of one of my publications, Appeals to Authority. And here you see the fragment before you, one side with Latin. It's an appeal by a Jew of Girona to the king of Aragon. And on the back, there's drafts, includes a draft of a Hebrew letter, which appears to have been formulations for a letter drafted to rabbinic authority. Next slide, please. In terms of researching halachic sources, first of all, she mentioned that in Israel, in the Jewish studies community, when I first entered the field, it was sort of taken for granted that Jews would not be reusing their manuscripts in such a manner. Such a thing today is somewhat abhorrent, and this view was essentially projected back into other times and places. So where do we begin to research halachic sources about use of medieval manuscripts? Well, although Catalonia boasted a very prolific rabbinic community whose responsa graced the shelves of yeshivot and libraries to this day, we don't find any mention of this topic. It was not a topic. It was not an issue. The first time we find a direct address of this issue is in 16th century Salonika, populated to a great extent by exiles from the Spanish diaspora. Rav Samuel de Medina, known as Maharshadam, provides the first extant source to deal with the issue in depth. Note, now let's review his arguments here. Maharshadam suggested that manuscripts which were not written with ktiva tama do not require geniza or disposal as sacred manuscripts. They could be disposed of otherwise. So ktiva tama means only complete letters, no ligatures. Here I included on this slide below an illustration of the most common Hebrew ligature, the Aleph and Lamed together, written together as one letter. But in Spanish cursive, there are many other ligatures also. This is one of the ligatures that survived into the printing age and into the modern day to a great extent. So as soon as we have ligatures, then according to Maharshadam, this could be considered a sign that this manuscript is not intended for ritual use in the synagogue because ligatures would disqualify it, and therefore it does not have full status as Kitvei HaKodesh, as a sacred text. Note that of all these arguments, Maharshadam in fact rejected all these arguments, as did Ibn Khabib, and they were themselves stringent in these matters. But it is a tribute to their intellectual honesty that they provided reasons for leniency, which they proceeded to disagree with. So a second argument for leniency provided Maharshadam is the writing material, paper. Since only parchment can be used for communal reading in the synagogue, for documents, to say for Torah and prophets, and also mezuzot and tefillin, as soon as we have a manuscript written on paper, it does not have the status of Kitvei HaKodesh. As mentioned before, Marshdam rejected this leniency. A third argument for leniency provided in Marshdam is lishma, that we should know that the writing was intended at the time of writing that it would be for synagogue use. Now, Talmudic texts, commentaries, liturgical texts, and so on, these can be taken for granted that they were not written with an intent for liturgical use. So it could be argued that they do not have the status of Kitvei Kodesh. Rav Yosef David, another scholar of Salonika, added a nuance from not just that we don't just require Ktibat Tama, but as soon as a script deviates from the square block script, the Asherite script, and becomes any type of cursive or handwriting script, which would be disqualified for synagogue use, that automatically doesn't have status as Kitvei Kodesh, even if there are no ligatures. Lastly, Rav Moses Ibn Habib provided a distinction that only biblical works are actually prohibited and have a status as Kitvei Kodesh, not rabbinic writings. As I stated previously, Rav Ibn Habib rejected this argument. But we do find that several Jewish communities do appear to have been lenient in the matter, including the printers of Salonika that all of these sages argued with and who claimed that they had sources for leniency. This includes Catalonia, Salonika here, and also in Yemen. Up until the modern era, it was common to use manuscripts of Talmud, Rambam, commentaries in their bindings, and they were not stringent with this matter. All right, next slide, please. The importance of the paper revolution should not be underestimated. Not only did it pave the way eventually for printing, but the availability of this cheaper writing material, cheaper than parchment, likely affected the nature of rabbinic and other medieval literatures. For our purposes, bookbinding, it brought about a fundamental shift in the practice of the crafts. Next slide, please. Here, an important distinction between two types of bookbindings should be made. Our study here concerns only the paper-based system, which was imported into Christian Europe over the course of the Middle Ages. This chart I've provided here describing the differences between Northern European bookbinding, which was featured parchment writing material, and bindings were wood. It could be other materials, but wood was very common. Whereas the Oriental Mediterranean system used paper, codices, and binding was more often than not made of recycled paperboard, of pieces of worn out paper glued together to form a sort of a cardboard. And this Oriental style eventually greatly influenced later early modern printing, in whose bindings are filled with scraps from the printers. Now, this chart is a bit grossly oversimplified, but I think the basic principles are useful. Next slide, please. The paper-based system did not enter Christian Europe without resistance. It was associated with the foreign Oriental world. The importers were Muslims and Jews. In northern regions of Christian Spain, with little to no steady Islamic settlement, Jews were the de facto practitioners. What about Christian holy books? One might suppose that Jews binding them would be the subject of rabbinic opposition. However, we find that Jews bound many Christian books. We see that many of them are currently housed in archives, even in Girona, such as the Diocesa. The only recorded opposition to the practice of Jews binding Christian holy books is from the Christian side. In 1415, Antipope Benedict XIII forbade Jews from binding Christian books which mentioned the names of Jesus or Mary inside the book. And I include in this slide a quote which I find very illustrative of the Christian perspective on the paper revolution by Pedro, head of the French Cluny Monastery in the 12th century. In the heavens, God reads the Talmud. So say the Jews. But what type of book is it? It looks like the type of books we read every day. But these are made of worn out rags or worse, written with ink that smells like damp feathers or marsh reeds. I think this illustrates the principle. Next slide, please. Let's now enjoy some specimens of this craft of bookbinding from Iberian Spain. I'm not going to analyze these in depth, but I just provide them to get an idea of what types of creations we're talking about here. Now, note that we don't know for sure that any of these individual bindings were produced by Jews. However, it seems likely that many of them were. Next slide, please. The bindings can be described as featuring repeated geometric patterns, characteristic of medieval Spanish design. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Products of the bookbinding craft developed to a high aesthetic level within the context of providing a useful object. In other words, we're not dealing here with high art in the sense that this was art for art's sake. This was art which served a purpose. In fact, which could characterize much of medieval Judaic art, that it fit some function, some ritual function or presentation function. That could also describe bookbindings. Next slide, please. The repeated geometric figures are also found in Spanish Jewish manuscript arts. This example was noted by Spanish scholars as a similar design found in a Spanish bookbinding and in a Hebrew illustrated manuscripts. Next slide, please. I don't have time really to go into this at all, but Spanish synagogues, which survive to this day, also feature similar repeating geometric structures, and much work remains to be done in comparing these items. Next slide, please. Different regional models in bookbindings have also already been noted in Spanish bookbindings. Patterns which repeat specific to geographic provinces. And it remains to be seen to what extent we can link this with that in Jewish manuscripts. Next slide, please. We're winding up here. Next slide. Next slide, please. To what extent can these models be correlated? No, back, please. No, backwards. Okay, one more. Can we go back one more? To what extent can these models be correlated with, can we go back one slide? Is it possible? Yes, wonderful. To what extent can these models be correlated with Spanish arts design models from other media? no, forward. Both Jewish and general examples. It remains to be seen. If we could go forward now, a couple of slides.
One more.
Forward. There, that's good. That's good. Okay, I'm winding up here. Conflicts in priorities between those interested in the ancient manuscript text artifacts and the whole bookbinding artifact was referred to by Mauro Pirani as a clash between archaeologists of the book and archaeologists of the text. This could be described as a conflict between Jewish studies and non-Jewish archivists, with Jewish studies scholars interested only in the texts of the Hebrew fragments extracted, and non-Jewish archivists interested in preserving the artifact in an intact state. However, with the knowledge that Jews likely created the bindings as their craft, this distinction is no longer clear. New technologies already applied to Cairo-Geniza fragments may prove even more useful when applied to bookbinding fragments. Recently, in cooperation with within books projects on European Geniza, scientists working on ancient inks and deciphering buried text via XRF tomography, mini CT scans, and Raman spectroscopy have begun to take notice of medieval bindings and the manuscripts within them. This potentially revolutionary avenue of research could open up the corpus of medieval Hebrew fragments significantly across the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. Next slide, please. Thanks again to all of the presenters and to everyone for listening. It was a great pleasure in providing this brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lior, for this wonderful presentation. The pictures were marvelous. I mean, to see these Mudehar book bindings, it's something phenomenal. And I'm sure that more exist because there must be other libraries that have got similar manuscripts that contain these magnificent bindings. The QA session will be at the end of the second presentation, and I have a great pleasure now in introducing our next speaker. It's Dr. Dagmara Buczok, and she will be talking about Paula de Manzi as a medieval Jewish scribe. Dr. Dagmara Buczok completed her doctoral studies in 2013 at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, and the École pratique des hautes études in the Sorbonne in Paris. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Jewish Art at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, working on the digital catalog of decorated Esther scrolls that will be part of the Bezalel Narkis Index of Jewish Art. Her research interests focus on the broadly understood history of Jewish books, including the relationship between manuscript and printed books, decorated Hebrew manuscripts with particular emphasis on Esther scrolls, Jewish art, and the history of Hebrew script. In 2019, she published a book on a collection of decorated Esther scrolls from the collection of the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. Pleasure to welcome Dagmara, and please, I hand over to you, Dagmara.
Thank you, Ilana. I will start screen sharing. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important workshop. Today I will present some results of my research on Paula de Manzi. Permit me to start with a quotation. Here ends the copy of the commentary on the prophets. I have copied it with my own hand. Paula, daughter of Rab Abraham, the scribe, son of Joab. These words open one of the 3 currently known colophons composed in the late 13th and early 14th centuries by Paula ben Abraham ben Joab Anaf. During my research on the Saraval collection at the library of the Wrocław University, I had the pleasure and the privilege to work on a book copied by Paula. I was truly excited that in my hands I was holding a codex from the late 13th century copied by a woman. This manuscript attracted me to the subject of the role of women in the Jewish book culture, but especially on the contribution of female scribes in the production of Hebrew manuscripts in the Middle Ages. The preserved material contains only a small amount of evidence of Jewish women acting as scribes in the medieval period. And it appears that Paula, but Abraham is the earliest among them. Amongst those very few women scribes who have already been identified are Hannah bat Menahem, who was active around 1385, possibly in Germany, Fromet bat Issachar, active in 1454 in France, and Miriam bat Benaya, active in the second half of the 15th century in Yemen. It is plausible that the number of Jewish women actively producing books in the Middle Ages was more numerous because some manuscripts copied by female scribes could have been lost, while others are not signed or preserved only in fragments. On the other hand, it cannot be ruled out that further research will reveal more examples. Even then, unquestionably, the number will not be significant, and they will not constitute only a small percentage of the total production of medieval Hebrew manuscripts. Based on the very limited material that is known to us, it can be assumed that in the Jewish world, women were only occasionally involved in the production of Hebrew manuscripts, and the numbers seem to be much lower if we compare them with the percentage of Christian women engaged in the book production. The research conducted in the last decade demonstrates that Christian female scribes copied and illuminated many more books during the medieval period than had previously been thought. The disproportionate numbers of Christian and Jewish women scribes may be explained by 2 main factors: the different structure of both societies and the different methods of book production. It seems that the majority of Christian female scribes were nuns who worked in monastic scriptoria, the special workshops dedicated to the copying and illuminating of books. However, scriptoria, as well as this kind of professional and multi-person production of books, were absent in the Jewish world, where scribes worked individually and private individuals frequently copied books for their personal use. Moreover, nuns were primarily isolated from society and could devote themselves fully to their work, while Jewish women needed to fulfill their daily family responsibilities, which undoubtedly reduced the time that they could spend on any other activity. Therefore, the small corpus of manuscripts copied by Jewish women makes them worthy of even more attention. At present, the total number of books produced by Paula is unknown, and only 4 codices can be unquestionably considered her works. The first of them is the previously mentioned manuscripts of Perush Nevi'im of 1288, with the commentaries by Yosef Karo and Rashi. Until 1939, it was stored in the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau. And now it is housed in the University Library in Wrocław. This codex is the most frequently mentioned in the publications dealing with the subject of female scribes. All remaining 3 codices are dated to 1293 and contain parts of Piskei Rit by Isaiah de Mali Ditrani. The volume housed at the National Library of Russia in Moscow discusses tractates Zevachim, Menachot, and Berachot, and the next 2 volumes are housed at the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford, and they contain discussion on the tractates Moed, Brachot, Shabbat, Eruvim, but also a part of Sefer HaMachia. Besides those codices, scholars frequently mention a 5th manuscript that Paula wrote, a prayer book copied in 1306 for her son Solomon ben Solomon. The manuscript was held for some time in the Jewish community of Verona, but its current whereabouts cannot be established. In addition, sometimes a manuscript containing commentaries to the prophets dated to 1282 from the collection of the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute of Warsaw is listed too. However, based on my research, I can't confirm if this manuscript ever existed, but it's quite probable that this is the codex from the Wrocław collection that was incorrectly assigned to the collection of the Jewish Historical Institute. The volumes penned by Paula include more than 1,500 undecorated folios in double column layout. The number of pages copied with Paula's hand and the columns of the text inscribed in skillfully and quickly placed letters prove we are dealing here with a well-trained scribe. A very similar script tending to semi-cursive features also the manuscripts penned by her father and other members of her family. At the same time, these codices confirm the assumption that the Hebrew square handwriting doesn't allow for the identification of the sex of a scribe. Any of the claims that women's handwriting is more delicate, irregular, and light cannot be confirmed on paleographical evidence. On an inability to distinguish the men's and women's handwriting makes that a subsequent manuscript copied by women may remain unnoticed. Unquestionably, Paula's scribal activity is strongly related to her family background. She was the daughter of Abraham Anaf, who was a member of an elite Roman intellectual family of the 13th and 14th centuries. According to the popular legend, the Anafs were one of 4 noble Jewish families that were taken from Jerusalem to Rome by Titus. The members of the family had a significant impact of the Jewish life in the city. For example, they attempted to codify the law for Roman communities and influenced the formulation of the Mahzor of the Roman Rite. When we examine the family tree of Anafs, that is visible on slide, we can see that among Paula's relatives were rabbis, Talmudists, exegetes, grammarians, parnasim, paitanim, physicians, and scribes. We know that for at least some other scribes were active at the same time as Paula, and we know those their names, and they are listed in the slide. They represent different branches of the family identified by different variants of the surname. That is Anaf, Anavim, and Minhanavim, or Pietosi, Piatelli, Umani, Delimansi, or Deimansi, when an Italian equivalent of the Hebrew name was used. Additionally, some of them were called Bethel, Min HaKnesset, or the Synagoga. In today's presentation, I will be calling them Anafs in general. As Aaron Pryman says, in the Middle Ages, the status of the scribes in Rome was highly esteemed. I quote, "Men of noble families devoted themselves to this calling. The Roman scribes in the 13th century, whose names are preserved, were profound, educated men of letters, as we can see from the postscripts, which were often composed in poetical form. Some distinguished themselves as authors of independent works. All that proved significantly the importance and high regard enjoyed by the vocation of the scribes." The end of the quotation. And this is true in the case of the Anaf family. Many members of the family simultaneously perform 2 or more functions. For example, Paula's father, Abraham ben Yoav, was a poet and a scribe at the same time. His poems, at least 1 manuscript, are extant. Also, some manuscripts owned by him still exist. Having in mind his profession, it would be not surprising if he would be the person who taught Paula to write, and this may also explain the similarities in their styles. However, there is no written source that can confirm this assumption. Similarly, there is no evidence of what her training consists of. Also, unanswered is the question of whether Paula's brothers, Judah and Menahem, were trained by their father too. At the same time, so far, there are no indication of other women from the Anaf family acting as scribes. This suggests that even in such a significant family, Paula was a glorious exception, and due to this, in modern publications presenting her works, she is called a gifted member of her family, and she is listed among notable blue stockings of her family. Paula's case may be an important clue for discussion on Jewish female learning in medieval Italy. A careful examination of the pages penned by Paula, her father, and her relatives proves that the similarity of their handwriting styles is not limited only to the shapes of the letters, but that is not less important. Some convergences in the scribal habits can be found too. For example, we can discern the same equivalent for the tetragrammaton, a form of 2 letters Yud, penned on the same lever, and a third mark resembling Yud placed above them. Moreover, both scribes use the same ways of marking the abbreviations. The first can be seen when, for example, the word rabbi is shortened to letter resh with a dot or a very short line above. The second is visible in the words such as Amar or Omer that are abbreviated as the letter Aleph and letter Mem, whose part on the left is seriously reduced. And the text penned by a father and his daughter contain also ligatures. New marks obtained by combining 2 letters, for example, Aleph and Lamed or Aleph and Mem, to save space in the line and time of a copyist. Yet another common feature is left margins of the text columns that are not straight Although both scribes elongated the letters and divided the words when there was not enough space in the line. The only significant difference is the layout of the pages. In the manuscript copied by Abraham, there is one white column per page, and Paula's codices are inscribed in a double column layout. Moreover, a meticulous analysis of the codices penned by Paula allows us to discern letters from which short diagonal lines are going to the margins. In this way, she used to mark the 4 letters of her name, but in the manuscript from Oxford, she decided to highlight the letter Aleph and not He as the last letter of her name. In this method of marking, of the name was quite popular among Jewish scribes in the Middle Ages, and sometimes it is the only way to discover the name of a scribe. This is also the case with Paula's manuscript from Moscow, which lacks a scribal colophon, and without the acrostics, we would have been able to identify her as a scribe. In one of the codices from the Oxford collection, she has highlighted the letters of her name in 12 places. This frequency clearly indicates that she wanted to be remembered by her name. Even if Paula is not anonymous as a copyist, we cannot be sure about the pronunciation of her name. Therefore, in books, articles, and catalogs discussing her works, we can come across 4 different spellings of the name. We also don't know if Paula was her only name or if she had another Jewish name, which seems likely. Scholarly attention deserves the colophons, which appear at the close of Paula's codices from the Wrocław and Oxford collections, and to the colophon from the currently lost manuscript from Verona. Colophons are scribal notes written by the copies to express their self-identification, and they often supply details concerning the manuscript's production and other valuable information. Some of them are important historical sources. A vast number of Hebrew manuscripts don't contain colophons, but there are relatively numerous scribal notes composed by the Anaphs. It seems they were not shy of signing the manuscripts which they penned, and their signatures could be even a kind of a quality mark. Paula's notes are elaborate formulas containing noteworthy information that doesn't repeat. They confirm that she was not only able to copy the text that theoretically would be possible without substantial knowledge of Hebrew, but more importantly, they prove she was able to formulate sentences and ideas in this language. Moreover, they reveal that she was familiar with biblical quotations that supplement her colophons. All those are important clues that tell us about her level of education. Additionally, in the manuscript of 1293, she stresses very strongly God's help in its production, and based on this, we can assume that she was a pious person. In her colophon from the manuscript of 1288, Paula identifies herself by her name, followed by the names of her father and grandfather. Abraham described Ben Yoas. At the same time, she also stresses that her forefathers derived from Yehiel, who was the father of Nathan, the author of the renowned Talmudic lexicon, the Aruch. Nathan died before 1070, which is more than 2 centuries before Paula penned her colophon. By mentioning one of the leading intellectuals of the time, she emphasized her family ties that she was proud of. Through her relationship with Nathan was not in a straight line. Moreover, Paula's scribal notes disclose that she was married twice, or at least twice. Her first husband was Solomon ben Moshe ben Yekutiel Minha Dumim, known also as the Rossi. They remained married until Solomon's death in 1284 or 1285. From their marriage, 3 sons were born: Emmanuel, Yekutiel, and Solomon. The date of Paula's second marriage is unknown, but it seems she was married again very soon, because in the colophon of 1288, she says that she is the spouse of Yehiel ben Solomon de Mansi, her relatives. That is why she is sometimes named Paula de Mansi, but her other names, such as Paula but Abraham Hasofer, Paula but Abraham Anaf, or Paula but Abraham ben Yoav Anaf, are simultaneously used. The colophons in Paula's manuscripts include dates according to the Jewish calendar, and thanks to them, we can say that she was active for at least 18 years, specifically between 1288 and 1306. No later testimony of her activity has been discovered. The handwriting in the manuscript of 1288 suggests a well-trained scribe. However, it doesn't help to determine her age. We can only assume that she, as many other scribes, started her training at the very young age when their sight and condition were good enough for a number of hours of arduous work. Hardships of a scribe profession are the next issue I would like to pay attention to. In contrast to Christian manuscripts, Jewish books only occasionally show depictions of a scribe at work. 2 such images can be found in the Rothschild Miscellany from the second half of the 15th century. Both show a man sitting in front of a slanted desktop with a quill in his hand. I'm not aware of any representation of a Jewish female scribe from the Middle Ages, even if such images can be found in the Christian manuscripts. Through the picture of a scribe, I would like to draw attention to the enormous burden of the body resulting from staying in the same position for many hours while copying. Other, but not less important problems for a scribe could be caused by difficult conditions such as a bitter cold, poor lighting, or poor quality tools and materials. The conditions of scribes' work are only rarely included in their notes, and here I would like to quote the words of the 10th century scribe Florentinus that that shows how hard the work of a scribe was. I quote, "Because one who doesn't know how to write things is no labor. I will describe it for you. If you want to know how great is the burden of writing, it meets the eyes, it curves the back, it breaks the belly and the ribs, it fills the kidney with pain, and the body with all kinds of suffering. Therefore, turn the pages slowly, reader, and keep your fingers well away from the pages. For just a hailstorm ruins the fecundity of soil, so the sloppy reader destroys both the book and the writing. For as the last word is sweet to the sailor, so the last line to the scribe." At the end of the quotation. As I already showed, Paula's colophons convey some details about her personal life, but in all of them, she remains silent about the conditions of her work. Nevertheless, we can be sure that hundreds or thousands of pages.
Dagmara, excuse me, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Nevertheless, we can be sure that hundreds of thousands of pages copied by a scribe are a result of uncountable hours of his or her work, and as it is said, I quote, "Only 3 fingers were working, but the whole body was working." The end of the quotation. Presumably, Paula shared the same experience. Here, I would like to raise financial issues of the book production by especially the scribe salaries. Here again, the most valuable details can be gained from the scribal notes and contrasts between between the copy's patrons and customers. I am not familiar with any evidence of the prices of Paula's books and the payments she received from her work. But one detail has drawn my attention in the colophon at the end of the manuscript from the Oxford collection. She states in it that her relative, Menahem ben Benjamin, came to her and compelled her to copy this book for him. It seems there is some urgency in this request, and we may wonder why she was asked to copy this extensive work. We can only guess that all other scribes active in the city were busy with copying at the time and couldn't accept any additional order. And Menahem needed to quickly return the master copy to its owner. Another probability that can be considered here is that Paula didn't charge as much for her work as her male counterparts. When considering financial aspects of the Jewish book production, we should note that the scribal craft has been indispensable to the Jewish community since scribes copied scriptures, wrote legal documents, and they were also clerks and court secretaries. This special status of Jewish scribes is confirmed in the Babylonian Talmud tractate Sanhedrin 17b, which states that scholars shouldn't receive in a town where there is no scribe. On the other hand, it seems that it was not a profitable profession. Finally, I would like to raise a question. To what extent can Jewish scribes be considered craftsmen? In the case of this profession, the criteria are not so clear and obvious as for other occupations. It seems necessary to note here a specificity of the Jewish book culture, that is the large percentage of owner-produced books. It is believed that up to 50% of the colophon Hebrew manuscripts were produced for the self-use of their owners, and the remaining part was produced by hired scribes. This is notably different than the production of Christian manuscripts, the majority of which were written by hired scribes. In this case, I use financial matters as the main criterion, and this allows me to include amongst the craftsmen only hired scribes who copied the books in return for payment, especially as some of them were scribes wandering from town to town in search of work and income. Paula's codices represent both types of Jewish book production, because the previously discussed manuscript from Oxford collection was ordered from her, and the manuscript of 1306 she produced with her son in mind. On the other hand, it could be a valuable gift from a mother to the son, and due to her ability to copy it, she would save a goodly amount of money. Regardless whether a scribe copied the book for himself or herself, or he or she was hired by a patron, we should not forget that in the Middle Ages, the book production was based but not limited to the activity of scribes. Besides them, other craftsmen, as parchment makers and sellers and bookbinders, must be involved in it. To sum up, the already identified Jewish female scribes, Paula is an exception because relatively numerous details from her life are known, by still such basic details as the dates of her birth and death cannot be determined. Additionally, searching for historical sources and testimonies different than the manuscripts themselves is necessary, and hopefully it will be soon a theme of a deeper scientific discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation, Dagmara, very well presented. And of course, we would want to ask a few questions in a minute. But I will start the question session with a question for Lior, if I may. And that comes from Vera Henkelman. She's asking, did I understand correctly that the shown bindings where repeated geometric patterns are medieval? If yes, can you please say something about the frequent use of the star motif?
Yes, they're absolutely medieval bindings. The stars repeat quite often. We also find quite common a Star of David type of pattern, but that doesn't necessarily imply the associations to the Star of David pattern that we have today as a Jewish symbol. It was more a universal symbol, apparently. I can't really say much more about the star patterns, but there seems to be some type of geographic distribution of them throughout the Iberian Peninsula, with some regions focusing on them. And that's all I know.
Thank you very much indeed. And now a few questions for you, Dagmara, if I may. I'll start with a question from Maria Sturzebecher, and she's asking, was Paula active just as a scribe, or are there also evidence, or is there also evidence that she also illustrated the manuscript?
As far as I know, she was only a scribe. No one of her preserved manuscripts is decorated. So it seems that she only copied the text, and she doesn't want to, or she didn't think that it's necessary to adorn this book. She just make the titles. She wrote them in larger letters, but they are not sophisticated, they are not decorated anyhow. So for now, I can say only about her activity as a scribe.
Thank you very much. And now a question for Lior again from Sofia Buda. She's asking, you mentioned that these bindings were rarely signed. When did binders sign their work, and which part of the binding would we see the signature on? Where would it appear? Lior, please.
That's a great question, and the answer is that I don't know, because I haven't actually seen any binding that was signed ever. The most time I've spent with medieval bindings such as these was in Girona, in the historical and municipal archives, along with Esperanza a few years ago when I visited. And those bindings, mostly of notary books, are not the most fancy types of books. They're simple, practical books of like ledgers of records, and they're very, I would say they're very aesthetically pleasing and nice productions, but they're not these works of high art, like regal objects. So I haven't actually seen it myself. I'm just that statement is based on reports from Madrid, from the conservator at the Escorial library, and maybe Esperanza knows more about this, about the. I'm not, and in addition to the signing of a binding within, the other historical record could be an external record. In the archives, the municipal archives, they make a ledger for the expenditures, and they wrote there that this binding for this important book was produced by this certain Jew, and he was paid a certain amount of money. And so from there we have the records. Where the actual book would be signed, I don't know, but I hope to figure that out at some point.
Thank you very much indeed. And now a question for Dagmara, and that comes from Shofia Buddha, and she's asking, if Paula had a Hebrew name, why would she use the Christian name in the manuscripts and not her Hebrew name? Thank you. Can you please answer?
I have no idea, to be honest, but this Christian name seems to be a bit strange when we are, because we know the background of Paula. We know that she was a member of one of the most important families in Italy at the time, and I don't know how to answer this question. But for me, it's a bit strange that she uses Christian name, obviously Christian name.
Well, thank you, Dagmara. And now another sort of comment rather than a question, and that comes from Bowman Cabin. And he says, as a Torah scribe, it is exciting to hear about colleagues from the medieval period. I'm also interested in the health risks of scribes in the medieval period regarding vision. Poor lighting, for instance, that obviously is affecting the vision, lack of glasses and magnifiers. And then the same person is saying also something about the economics of lamp oil and the success of a medieval scribe. This would be a competitive edge for a wealthier scribe or patron. So do you want to answer this comment? It's not quite a question, it's more of a comment from a Torah scribe, a professional Torah scribe.
So I can add only that I decided to pay our attention to this, also to the hardships of the scribe's profession, because I think that this is the subject that is very rarely discussed in the literature, and I found very few information regarding the conditions of work of Jewish scribes. And I would be grateful if any of the participants could maybe send by email or maybe wrote on chat to give some remarks where such pieces of information can be found. And here I'm talking about those two things. I mean the hardships of the scribal activity and also the financial aspects of the Jewish books production. in the Middle Ages. I would be very grateful for this.
Thank you very much, Dagmara. There are more questions for you. There is a very long question. Sorry?
Okay. Ilana?
Yeah, please. Yes, Leon.
Could I comment briefly on the last couple of questions? I don't know anything about the actual health conditions for scribes in the Middle Ages. I recall that I saw once a discussion about nearsightedness from an evolutionary perspective of why this would develop, this, which is seemingly a negative trait. Why? Where did it come from? And one of the theories that's been floated is scribal activity, where one has to read up close, very close, and where nearsightedness actually provides certain advantages in detail. I don't know. This is not my field at all. I don't know anything about it, but it has been discussed somewhere in the scholarly community. If I could just make a brief comment about the previous question about the names. First of all, my late grandmother was named Paula, and her Hebrew name was Sephora. So it strikes a bit close to home. But I think that anyone interested in this question might be interested in the scholarship of Professor Tali Lan. And she has interesting discussions about where non-Jewish names were commonly used as the name in place of Jewish names. And I think this includes Catalonia to an extent. Yeah, that's a brief reference.
Well, thank you very much for the additional comments. Very, very interesting. So let me move on to the next question addressed to Dagmara again. But if Lior has any additional comments, please don't hesitate to provide them. And this question is rather wrong, and the person didn't sign. I can't see a name here. So the person wants to ask Dagmara whether the codicological scrutiny reveals wider familial collaboration in the production of Paula's books or any of the Anaf's books. And also, is there any evidence that would make us understand Paula's role as a scribe in the wider ecology of book production, from the commission to gathering the resources to writing, binding, and so on? And also, does it mean that she wrote books as at least twice married woman? Could the study of Paula's work in the context of women's work in the 14th century shed new light on Paula's activity? This is a very complex question, so I hope that you got all the facets. Please, Dagmara.
I'm sorry, but the question is really very long.
I apologize. Hi, Ilana. This is me, Magdalena, and this is my
sorry.
Very long question. So I briefly repeat, if it's all right. It will be probably more swift. I'm very known for asking convoluted questions, but the question is actually whether the codicological look on the materials can help us understand more about Paula's role as a scribe, and her role and her function or status in the family. Like, do you see any signs of wider collaboration as the book itself was produced in the various steps that would help us to understand, to see Paula's role somehow more embedded in this like familial business in a way of scribes? And the second question is more about the sociology and social history of women's work, like whether you actually plan to do more research on the women's work in that particular century, and then perhaps to reflect more on scribe and concept of a male expertise through Paula's work. Thank you.
Okay, so if I have understood properly your first question, you are asking if we can trace like a part of book that was produced by Paula and another one and another stage that was done by any of her relatives, like for example, bookbinding. Is it the question?
Yes, yes, or any type of collaboration. Well,
I can't say this on the basis on her codices. It seems that she had quires of parchment, and she was simply a scribe. But I can't say anything else about the production of her codices.
Is that satisfactory, Magdalena?
yes, of course. It just raises more questions. So I will be looking forward to read more. Thank you.
Any additions from Lior?
No.
No, no. Okay, so let's move on to the next question that comes from Dr. Andreas Lenhardt. And again to Dagmara, but Lior can join in. Is the abbreviated MEM phenomenon seen only in Paula's family in that period and region? I ask this because it can be found north of the Alps in the 14th century as well, and seems to be quite a common feature. Dagmara.
Okay, so I don't know. I didn't compare the manuscripts of other scribes that were active in Rome at the time, but I found it in several different manuscripts copied by the members of the family, and this is also the question. Somehow also related to the previous one, to the previous question about the cooperation, about the cooperation within the family, and also the question about the training, because the easiest explanation for using of the same sign, of the same mark, would be that the scribes were trained by the same master. But unfortunately, I don't know how the scribes were prepared, were trained for their profession. So yeah, it can be, it's possible that this custom could be popular in Italy, and it could spread north from Alps also in the following centuries.
Thank you very much. Moving on to a question from Rachel Kuferman, and she's asking, Dagmara, are there other examples of women scribes and also daughters of scribes?
But not from Italy. We know one example of.
Oh, we can't hear you, Dagmara.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Please carry on. Please carry on.
Mm-hmm. As I've mentioned at the very beginning of my presentation, I've mentioned the name of Miriam, who was the daughter of Benaiah, and she was active in Yemen, in Sana'a, in the second half of the 15th century. And here was another family of scribes. We know a few scribes from this family. If I remember properly, two brothers of Miriam were also scribes, and I think uncle or two uncles, other relatives also there were scribes. And I know that a large percentage of the books that were produced in Yemen should be associated with this family of scribes. But we have no similar information regarding to other women from medieval Europe. So it seems that we have like one example in Italian society, a woman that was a member of the family of scribes, and another one is from Oriental society, and it's much later, because here we have 13th, 14th century, and an example of Miriam is from the 15th century, from the second half of the 15th century.
Thank you very much. And a question from Tanya Pothoff. Do we know whether Paula's husbands were also scribes? If members of her family also worked as scribes, do you think they worked in a kind of family workshop? Agmara, please.
Okay, so can you hear me? Because
Yes,
I can see.
We can hear you.
That's why I said at the end of my presentation that some further research are awaiting, and unfortunately, I don't know. I would like to ask, and I would be again very grateful if any one of the participants can provide any sources that can be helpful in this respect. But unfortunately, I don't know what was the profession of the sons of Paula, because it would be also possible that they were active as scribes. I don't know. And also I need to tell you that I've included into the presentation the family tree of the Anafs. It was taken from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and it's really very difficult. Even if we have a brief descriptions, maybe not descriptions, characteristics for the members of the family in the encyclopedia to discover the relationship and who was whom in this family, and it's really very difficult to trace the scribes from this family, especially that they use very different names. And this was the reason that I decided to mention, to list those names, because at the very beginning of my research, it was very difficult to understand that people with completely different surnames can be members of the same family. So I hope that the further research will give us more details about the family.
Thank you so much, Mara. And there are a few more questions, if you can bear with us. A question from Blanca Viluendas, who is asking, from the paleographical point of view, is Paula's hand and her father's of Italian style or Oriental, given that his father was from Jerusalem, if I understand it correctly? So please.
No, I think the handwriting is Italian. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why this person is asking about the possibility of Oriental influence on the handwriting. As far as I know, her father was born in Verona. And also I found in some sources that for some time, Paula could also stay in Verona, but we know for sure that she was active in Rome. And I think also the handwriting of other members of her family are Italian.
Very well, thank you. Now a very brief comment from Eva Frojmovic, who is saying nearsightedness, is it good for micrography? Because you talked about the scribes suffering when they actually put ink to paper. So do you think nearsightedness, is that something good for creating tiny script? Please, Eva, if you want to add anything.
Sorry, I wasn't being serious. This was not, I apologize. Can I take it back? This is
is that is just a comment?
I didn't, just ignore it. I'm so sorry. It's, you know, I think it would take us into a whole nother, a separate workshop with medical historians.
I didn't want to ignore any of the participants here. Right, so a question from Naomi Sarig. It's rather a general remark to both presenters. So eyeglasses are mentioned for the first time in Italy in the late 13th century and spread over Central Europe rather rapidly. So here is a comment for you to think about, both of you.
Thank you.
And then another question for Dagmara from Sofia Buda. If there is time, we have a few minutes left. And she has a comment too. She's saying, you mentioned the Aleph Lamed ligature as a common feature in the manuscripts copied by Paula and those copied by her father.
Yeah.
However, Paula's ligature looked very different from the one her father used. So do you have anything to add, Dagmar?
Yeah, I agree. And it was my idea to show that, yes, both scribes included ligatures in their text, but I was afraid that there will be no time to discuss them in detail. I agree. In Paula's manuscripts, in my opinion, the ligature is somehow similar to letter Tet with a kind of short flag on the left. And in her father, in Abraham's manuscript, the sign, the new mark, form of parts of the letters, Aleph and Lamed, is different. But I can see, of course, I choose only 2 examples for my presentation, but I saw also different ligatures in his manuscript, and also I think because in the case of Paula, we know 4 manuscripts, but in the case of Abraham, I know only 1 manuscript that was copied by him. And I think it would be useful, and it should be check how it looks in other manuscripts copied by him. So I don't know how to explain this, because this is a kind of even if the ligatures of the letters Aleph and Mem are quite similar, but indeed the ligatures of letters Aleph and Lamed are different. But I don't know how to explain this. The only explanation that I can propose is that even in the handwriting of a particular scribe, in the handwriting of the particular scribe, we can see sometimes different forms of the same letter. So maybe this can be an explanation. I don't know.
And lastly, in the very last minute we have,
I think that Lior, I'm sorry, I think Lior
wants to say something. Please.
I just really quickly, I would want to refer to a scholarship of Judith Schlanger on the development of different types of handwriting, and literatures are associated with Arabic, and how scribes that had regularity with using another type of script adopted the same hand movements into their Hebrew script. I don't recall exactly the article of hers, but she deals with this this question in depth, and it might shed light on this question, and also the fact that different letters are written in different forms. In the Arabic scripts, many letters are written in different forms depending on their location within the word, and this was borrowed into Spanish cursive to an extent, and also into Italian script to an extent. Yeah.
Well, one short comment from Naomi Sarik, and that is the very last before we have a break. And she says Paula also has a slight slant to her writing, which does it not the case in her father's handwriting. So she has a slant and her father doesn't. So that's Naomi Sarik's comment.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to reply to that, but it's just a comment. So there are no more questions. And before I finish, I want to thank the presenters, Lior Jacobi and Dagmara Buchot, for their wonderful presentations. And I'm sure that the participants have enjoyed it tremendously. So thank you very much indeed, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Joseph Isaac Lipschitz. I work with Professor Golding on Ashkenaz in the Middle Ages, and I would like to chair two speakers. The first one is Mark Fernandi Yerushalmi. Mark Fernandi Yerushalmi was born and raised in Hungary and moved to Israel when he was 18. He studied printing and computer graphics at Hadassah College in Jerusalem. Studying to become a scribe allowed him to combine his interests in Judaism, art, and linguistics. He worked in the field of Hebrew scribal art for 15 years, receiving his certification as a scribe in 2005, and his scroll supervisor certificate in 2008 from Vad Mishmeret Stam, the Center for International Activities to Preserve and Promote the Integrity of the Scribal Arts. For the past several years, he worked in scribal writing and digital examination and repair of Hebrew scrolls. He received his MA in History of Jewish Culture in 2016 from the Jewish Theological Seminary at the University of Jewish Studies in Budapest. Currently, he is a doctoral student jointly at APHE PSL Research University, Paris, and at the Jewish Theological Seminar at Budapest. Please, the chair is yours.
Thank you very much. So now you can see relatively well the screen.
Except for what you covered.
Oh, I think I didn't. I mean, I don't
Now
think
it's
I covered
fine.
anything.
Fine now.
Okay. 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 So thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this workshop. So I will talk in the first half of my lecture about what you can see in the title, the work of a scribe, says craft and materials used. And I was asked to share things from my current research, which is actually part of my PhD thesis that I will defend the next week, hopefully, in the second half of my lecture. So just a quotation from a Cambridge Dictionary: what is a scribe? A person employed before printing was invented to make copies of documents. Actually, it is not so correct, because even today there are scribes existing. Like myself, I'm working as a scribe, and actually as a Jewish scribe, many things didn't change since medieval times, because the literature that we are using, the halachic literature that has to be obeyed during writing, is mostly based on medievalist literature and older, and also the newer literature is also based on the same old traditional writing. So the Hebrew word for sofer, as for scribe, is sofer stam. Stam is a short for Sifrei Torah, S for Sifrei Torah, T for Tefillin, which is phylacteries, and Mezuzot for M. Later I will show it shortly, but I'm sure most of you know. So a Jewish scribe, a sofer stam, after he does his job, the Torah scroll or tefillin or mezuzah is a holy object. This is a quotation from the Babylonian Talmud. When I went to Rabbi Ishmael, he said to me, my son, what is thy occupation? I answered, I'm a scribe. He told me, my son, be careful, because thy work is thy work of heaven. If thou omittest a single letter or oddest a single letter, do thus as a consequence destroy the whole world. So because of this and the similar reasons, there are many very rigid laws in order to achieve the purpose of having a holy object. So what is the method of writing? There are certain practices that a scribe has to do, and besides the practical part, he also has to have intention, kavanah in Hebrew, that he is writing now a Sefer Torah or a Torah scroll or a tefillin or other objects. So that certain things, certain techniques and methods are actually the same as were done by non-Jewish scribes when making non-specifically sacral objects. For example, this drawing is an Italian one, but we do today the same, preparing writing quills from feather. So there are parts of the job of the Jewish scribe that are mandated by Jewish law, and there are other things that are non-binding. For example, just one example here is it's well known that the scribes of him immerse themselves in a mikveh before writing, in general, writing God's name. On the left, you can see a medieval mikveh reconstructed today, and right a modern one. And here, this is the biggest mikveh in Central Europe called Balaton, but it's a lake. It can also be used for this purpose. So just one quotation from a medieval source from Bariat Tosafot about immersing in the mikveh. Haya Omer HaChasid. The Chassid is Rabbi Judah ben Samuel of Regensburg, called the Yehuda Chassid. So he said, a person who is writing in a mezuzah or tefillin or Torah scroll he has to immerse himself and in the mikveh. But you can hear me well, right?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, so but even if every part of the practical things are done as should be done, if it's not done with intention, then it won't become a holy object. For example, here what you can see here is
in industrial spaces.
Is this Torah scroll written by a robot, so now I'm continuing from here. Sorry. Okay. So, for example, this robot that you could see in this short video is writing exactly what a software, or almost exactly what a software does, but it won't become a real Torah scroll that can be used in a synagogue because the robot doesn't have any intention to do what he does, or it does. So what are the sources of the practical laws? There are different sources, but just in short, it's tradition. So what kind of traditions we have? There are in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh or Torah, there is very few things written about it, or mostly just hints. But those hints are explained by rabbinical teachings and elaborate on this text. And there are also other sources that are not written at all, not even hints in the written Torah. This is called in Hebrew Halacha leMoshe Sinai, which means a law communicated to God by God to Moses. So not mentioned at all. Okay, so what does a scribe write? So one of the medieval sources that we have is the Maimonides, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, who explains all the details of writing Torah scrolls and other similar objects. He says that there are among the, I won't read everything, but just the most important things, that among the 10 requirements, he says there are 2 involved with the composition. One, that it must be written with ink, and they must be written on parchment. So what does it mean? Ink. So Maimonides gives us a recipe or recipes, but there are examples, as we will see. For example, using vapor of oils on tar and wax, etc. But later he says that, so one of the type of ink is called carbon ink. Other is iron gall ink, which is mostly used today by scribes of today. And it's used also since the medieval times and before. So he says vitriol. So he gives here different options. So after he says that if you can use different recipes, so what does it mean ink? He says that, so ink means that it shouldn't be red or green or other tint or gold, meaning it has to be black. So the one important thing is, according to the Maimonides, that it has to be black. Other sources, like for example, Yaakov ben Asher, quoting Rabbeinu Tam, Yaakov ben Meir, he says that it also has to have etzim. It has to have wooden materials in the among the ingredients. Other sources also mention other things like that it has to be cooked. Okay, so this is the golnut when it's still green, and later it becomes, when it's dry, then they grind it. Actually, it's called golnut in English, but it's not really a nut, but illness of a tree. A certain wasp comes and bites the the tree and puts the eggs on the leaves. So what we have actually is a wasp nest. And when it's grounded, we mix it with water and add vitriol, which is also one of the ingredients that Maimonides mentioned, and then also add gamma arabicum, which is also from trees. And interestingly, all the ingredients are not black when because of chemical process, it becomes black in the end. So on what those scribes write, so on parchment or leather of kosher animals, for example, sheep or a cow. This is also a quotation from Maimonides, speaking about the different types of leathers. Here you can see that a hide may be taken and divided in half in the manner known to the parchment processors. 2 pieces of leather, a thin one which is on the side where the hair grew, and a thicker one on the side of flesh, and he explains on which side do we write. And so the upper layer is called clef in Hebrew, or parchment. The bottom layer is called duchsustus. It's a Greek word of Greek origin. It's the bottom layer, and if they don't separate the 2 layers, it's called gvil in Hebrew. So the upper layer is the epidermis, and the bottom is the dermis. The technique how to prepare parchments changed, but the technique that we use today was already done in the medieval times. Once they divided the 2 layers into 2, having both existing after the division, the dermis and the epidermis. What the modern, meaning from the medieval times, the modern technique is that you scrape, you take off with a sharp utensil that bottom layer. Like here, you can see Fritz, the parchment maker, a medieval monk preparing parchment. The same way is done today. You can here see the very same utensil done be used today. Also, one other rule that they have to be ruled. The parchment has to be ruled, and also here, even though technically you can use a computer in order to move the ruler, and it is done actually, that they use a computer to make it precisely the exact place where to make the line. But even then, a living person has to rule, has to done the line itself after the ruler is moved by the computer. Here maybe he doesn't, I think here he doesn't use computer at all. Okay, so the quill that we use are made of today mostly Turkey. Of course, in medievals it wasn't Turkey because America, Jewish scribes didn't know Turkey yet because it comes from America, but goose. We saw this picture before. Okay, so besides, so Torah scrolls, as I mentioned before, scribes write Torah scrolls and tefillin, which includes 4 little parchments on the hand, on the arm, and Jewish religious people, men put it on their arm and hand, and mezuzah on the doorpost. This is the biggest mezuzah at the airport here in Israel, which I didn't see for a long time. And Gittin also have to be written by scribes and obeyed certain ritual laws, because it's actually written in the Torah that it has to be written. Here's a quotation from Deuteronomy. So this is our modern get, and here you can see a get from the Cairo Gniza. Okay. Certain, just very few examples of the laws that has to be obeyed, also mentioned here, for example. But I won't read you the text, but this is a tour from Rabbi Yaakov Ben Asher. I won't read it, I just because we have no time for that, but a few things that it has to be the letters in a mezuzah and tefillin have to be written in order, meaning, for example, a mezuzah starts with the letter Shin, Shema Israel. So Shin, if, for example, the Shin is forgotten for some reason or it became unkosher, the scribe cannot go back and rewrite it because it won't be written in order. Each letter must be surrounded by parchment, meaning that two letters can touch each other, and letters must be created through writing, not erasing. For example, if this picture on the left side, if it would be done on a parchment with ink, not like here in a stone letter that actually you can see in Jerusalem next to Yad Vashem. So these guys are taking out the inner part of the stone, so it wouldn't be kosher if it would be done like this with ink. Here, all what I said is mentioned here. You can believe me. Here also Megillat Esther, we just read a few days ago in Purim. Yesterday was Purim, and we read it. Also, that it has to done by scribe, sofer, and besides things that I mentioned before, what can make those laws that are just mentioned, if they are not obeyed, the scroll is not kosher, so-called, meaning that unfit for literal use. So if the ink cracks and is broken and you can't read the letter, or even it becomes something else, not what it should be, then it's also not kosher. Actually, in Megillat Esther, in Esther scroll, the tradition is more lenient, but I won't enter to the details. Okay, so in short, I will talk about some highlights from my thesis that actually, yeah, as I mentioned, it will take place next Thursday. If you want to see it, it's online, so you can contact me. I was supposed to fly to Paris in order to defend the thesis, but I won't have to because it will be online. Okay, so today, by scribes today, mostly you can find three types of letters used: Sephardic, and two main types of Ashkenazic, which is Beit Yosef and Arizal. I didn't, in my thesis, I'm talking about the Ashkenazic types and comparing them. Only few letters are different between the between Arizal and Beit Yosef styles. So I didn't deal with the other letters in my thesis, and also not with the Sephardic one. So what is the source? Oh, probably you can't read it, right? It's very small, short, very small. But I will try to tell you what it's. So this is the main source for having special letters written as special shape, according to the Arizal, who is Rabbi Isaac Luria, Ashkenaz, who lived in the some 500 years ago in Tzfat. And also the other type is named the Beit Yosef is named also named on Rabbi Yosef Karo, who also lived about 500 years ago, also in Tzfat in the Galilee. So this is Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was his Rabbi Luria's student, mentioning that these specific letters have to be written in a specific way, Aleph and Dalet, etc. No, not Dalet, but he's saying that, okay, that a certain part of Dalet should look like a Dalet. So,
Mark,
yes?
Make sure that we have to close soon, so if you want to sum up, please.
Okay.
You have about 7 more minutes at least.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's my fault.
Okay. Oh, I was okay. So there are also other Lurianic sources, while a little bit different. So I did include in my research Chet, which is not mentioned by Rabbi Chaim Vital. And the Tet is also a letter that some Kabbalistic sources mentioned as a letter that should be written a specific way, others don't. I did include tet and chet, but I didn't include vav, even though Rabbi Chaim Vital mentions it, because some other sources, like what I'm quoting here, Rabbi Zakuto, says that vav only in the tetragrammaton has to be written in a specific way. So this Kabbalistic teaching means that the letters are kosher even if they are not written like this, like Rabbi Chaim Vital says, or Rabbi Yitzchak Luria says, but in order to make it really good, I Kabbalistically fit. So what I don't really understand all the what it means, but these letters should be written in a specific way. The main source for the other script, as I mentioned, is the Beit Yosef by Rabbi Yitzchak, by Yitzchak Yosef Karo, sorry, Beit Yosef, and he is quoting actually an earlier source, a medieval source called Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar, as we know today, has few layers in it, meaning that the main, we'll call it Baruch She'amar because Rabbi Samson ben Eliezer was from Saxony in the 14th century. He wrote a commentary on an earlier medieval source by Rabbi Abraham ben Moshe, also from Germany, and later Rabbi Yom Tov Lippmann Mühlhausen, also from the 14th century, Erfurt. He wrote Sefer Alpha Beta that later was joined together with Baruch She'amar, and another source by an anonymous author. Okay, so which are these letters? In the end, that I did check in the research. So these are the letters, and not all the letters, but only certain elements. The left foot of the aleph, the right part of the chet, the left of the tet and the ayin and the tzadi, and also the right part of the tzadi, and again tzadi, the final tzadi, and shin, also the left side of the tzadi. So, but I didn't have to go, as I said, didn't check the whole letter, but only certain graphic elements because they are repeated. Like the left elements here are the same. It's like or a vav-shaped element like here, or a zayin-shaped element like here. So I did have to check in the end only 3 graphic elements, which is the shape of the zayin or the vav, and how it changed during the centuries, why it happened that one of the sages described these letters as with a vav-shaped element or a zayin. Other was other was the tzadi, and also the right part, not on the left, but here I'm talking about the right part element of the tzadi. If it's a yod or a normal yod, or a yod that is turned around, and the left foot of the aleph, I call it foot. I will talk about this, and on what I did is I based my research mostly on 4 medieval Torah scrolls. The reason that they are so important because they are unchanged for sure since the middle of the 14th century, for unfortunate reasons, because there was at the Black Plague, there were, as we know, there were pogroms, and the Torah scrolls were they took them from the Jewish community in Erfurt, and since then these are in non-Jewish hands, so nobody used them as Torah scrolls and nobody updated them, so-called. So they are housed today in the Berlin State Library. Just one page as an example from my thesis. This technique that you can see here, I also use in my master's thesis, and I learned it from Dr. Edna Enkel from the National Library in Israel. I did graphic analysis on the letters. So one interesting source from Baruch She'amar, interesting quotation, that because today these manuscripts are available on high resolution online, so my job was much easier than could be before, the centuries before, if somebody would want to research the topic. So this here, Baruch Shamar is talking about the shape of the letter tzadi. And there's the Chassid who is the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid who I mentioned before, wrote, and these are his words: the spike of the yod that is behind the nun should be not deep, so that it reaches the bend of the nun, such that it will then look like an ayin. Until here are the words of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Indeed, I found, says Baruch Shamar, many tefillin in which all the tzadis were like ayins, and I disqualified them. So because now we can take a look at the tzadi in the Erfurt scroll, one example, here we can understand that he is mentioning that in Erfurt saw such examples and he didn't like it. You can see this is the letter tzadi, but this element, the yud-shaped element, is very deep, is not connected in the middle of this line, but close to the bottom, making it very similar to an ayin. And because it's very similar to ayin, somebody could read it by mistake an ayin, so he disqualified such letters. And I used as explanation other medieval manuscript called MS Hamilton 288, or called Hamilton Siddur. It was very helpful. It is very helpful because it has zoomorphic letters, this manuscript, zoomorphic and anthropomorphic letters. And like you can see, sometimes very strange creatures. And these creatures did help me to explain such things that, for example, here is a quotation from the Zohar. It's talking, it looked upward like this, looked downward like this, so as if the letters are looking certain directions. And if I use these zoomorphic letters, I can show how what the writer means when turning. Or here, this quotation is from the Baruch Shamar, the mentioned medieval source. So he's using expressions like this: the foot of the yud, face of the yud, neck of the tzadi, foot of the yud again, neck of the letter tzadi, face. So he's touching on. Okay, so I won't have to, I know that I have no time to show the illustrations from my thesis, but I made a 20 minutes video from it, put together different illustrations explaining what we can see.
Thank you very much, Mark.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We were harsh before. I want to continue with I'm sorry. I want to continue with Tzvi Orgad. Dr. Tzvi Orgad works as is an assistant lecturer in the Department of Jewish Art at Bar Ilan University, where he completed his doctoral studies. His thesis focused on the work methods of Eliezer Zussman from Brody, a synagogue painter who worked in Franconia in the early modern period. Orgad is the author of the articles on synagogue art and researcher in the Israeli-German project, the Torah Ark in German Lands. His main research topics are synagogue interior paintings and the work methods of synagogue painters and manuscript illustrations in the Middle Ages and early modern period. I want to do what I didn't do before because we were harsh. I want to thank very much, firstly, Adi and Sarah for organizing and working so hard I know it from our center side. And of course, Professor Goldin and our friends, Maria and Andreas. And I want to thank you, Mark, for your beautiful presentation. So please, Tzvi, can you start now?
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. Do you hear me well? Okay, so we will just start, although I want to thank the organizers and etc. And but everyone's tired, so just okay. Usually, when referring to the work processes during the making of medieval illuminated manuscripts, there's a distinction between two types of actions: writing and illuminating. Some manuscripts represent the collaboration between a scribe and an illuminator. In others, both text and image were made by one craftsman. However, the distinction between text and image may not provide a broad enough picture of the division of roles in manuscript production. In this paper, I would like to expand the discussion regarding the sub-roles of craftspeople working in a Jewish manuscript production workshop. The case study is a 15th century Jewish manuscript workshop that produced two Haggadot that we know about. The second Nuremberg Haggadah and the Yehuda Haggadah. Scrutinizing these two illuminated manuscripts will reveal various roles of the craftsmen who worked in this workshop. The process of producing illuminated manuscripts in the Middle Ages was usually based on teamwork of several craftsmen. Among these, craftsmen laying out the composition of the book, painters, and workers who applied the color, and scribes. In modern terms, we can call them art director, painters, and graphic designer. However, it is possible that some of the medieval illuminated manuscripts were made by a single craftsman. Either way, describing the work process of making these manuscripts, scholars usually refer to two separate crafts: writing, made by a scribe, and painting, made by a painter. This distinction is also made when it is certain, that the same craftsman did both, since writing and paintings are considered today different professions. However, it seems that the two crafts were more intertwined than usually considered. Analyzing the working methods involved in making texts and paintings in the Yehuda and Second Nuremberg Haggadah might support this thesis. The Second Nuremberg and Yehuda Haggadot are considered sister manuscripts. The two Haggadot were made in Franconia, probably in Nuremberg or Bamberg, in the second half of the 15th century. Katrin Krugman-Appel thoroughly investigated them almost 30 years ago. She concluded that the same painter made the layout and they were produced in the same Jewish workshop. Moreover, she argued that the Yehuda Haggadah was copied from the Second Nuremberg Haggadah. In the two Haggadot, there is an extensive use of gold, which might imply a premium product. However, examining the parchment used for the Yehuda Haggadah, there are at least 2 pages in which the parchment is damaged in prominent location within the page. According to the text, which is completed, the damage preceded his writing. Moreover, the scribe decorated the perforation with a vegetal pattern. This is not the only medieval Haggadah in which such defects are found. For example, in the Moscovich Mahzor made by Yoel Ben Shimon, a similar defect occurred. However, the perforation's central location in the Yehuda Haggadah might imply the use of inferior parchment. 2 more materials used in the Second Nuremberg and Yehuda Haggadot are black ink and gouache colors, which will be discussed in detail in this paper. Henceforth, I will review the work processes in making the two Agadot, divide them into separate sessions, place them in their correct order, and find the craftsmen who performed them. The first stage of making the Agadot was laying out the composition, okay, as we can see here, including the marginal illustrations and leaving space for the main text. Although their painting in the two Agadot are almost identical, they differ in several prominent features. Most striking, in the second Nuremberg Haggadah, the text starts in a recto page, while in the Yehuda Haggadah, it starts on a verso page. One of the characteristics I like most about the two Agadot is humor, expressed, for example, in short rhymed phrases within painted scrolls. These scrolls appear in a similar format in the two Agadot and were made by the craftsmen who outlined the initial drawings of the Haggadah. We can see them here. We can call the art director. Interestingly, the text written in the scroll of each of the two Agadot is different. Therefore, even though the Yehuda Haggadah was copied from the second Nuremberg Haggadah, the makers reconsidered the context of the non-standard non-standard texts. This action, which expresses some extent of freedom and creativity, also characterizes the following work steps, as we are about to see. I'm moving to the text now, and writing the text was the scribe's job. In the second Nuremberg Haggadah and Yehuda Haggadah, it was divided into several phases. The first phase was the black text. The scribe who wrote the main text in the two Agadot worked according to a strict brief, reflected in the reasonably uniform placement or location of the texts, and using a semi-cursive script in specific prayers which were not yet an integral part of the Passover Eve ritual at that time. The semi-cursive text differs from the one inside the scrolls on the margins. So maybe we can talk about two scribes now. According to the handwriting, some researchers argued that the same scribe wrote the text in the two Agadot. Nevertheless, looking closely at the text on the first page of these Agadot, differences emerge, not only in the letter's shape, but also in details such as the tags and the legs widths. Here we see the tags, we see very thin and long tags, and here they are shorter. And when you look at the closed letters, you can see a difference also in the shape. This is much more angular. This is much more circular. Okay, and also the samech. I don't know if you see it, but the samech is also closed here and open here. Therefore, while it is possible that one scribe wrote the black text in the two Haggadot, we cannot rule out the possibility that each Haggadah was written by a different scribe. Nevertheless, these scribes were probably trained to produce similar results. Various colors were applied in the two Haggadot to the instructional texts and initial words. These colors consist mainly of red, blue, green, and faint brown, like in the marginal paintings. On most pages, the same colors appear in the paintings and the text. Using the same colors might imply that the scribe and the craftsman applying colors to the illustrations worked at the same workshop. Two different colors laying methods have been detected in the colored text. Most of the text was written with a quill pen. In contrast, a few words were painted with a brush. Most of the initial words and instructional text of the two Agadot, maybe I'll go back. Yeah, this is better. Most of the initial words and instructional text in the two Agadot were done in gouache colors using a quill pen. In the second Nuremberg Haggadah, the green initial word Erev, okay, we see it here, is in the exact size of the black text above it. Hence, it was made with a quill of the same diameter. The colored text shape is uniform and resembles the black text design. Therefore, it is possible that they were performed by the same scribe. Christian scribes, I showed you too early. Christian scribes were depicted in medieval miniatures writing with more than one quill. For example, the 15th century scribe Guillaume de Lory or Jean de Meun, we don't know who he is exactly, was depicted copying a manuscript with black and red. Two ink jars are placed on the right side of the table. The scribe holds a pen in his hand and another pen is tucked into his hat. Okay, here. Guillaume presumably cleaned the quill well before stuffing it into his hat because we can't see any traces of red or black on his eyebrows. Unlike Christian scribes, it is not likely that the scribes of the two Agadot wrote the black and colored text simultaneously. Firstly, they used about 5 colors, the same as the number of the pigments used in the marginal paintings. And it is not probable that their hat was wide enough for tucking 5 quill pens. More seriously, according to the black and colored letter styles, it is more reasonable that the Yehuda Agadah in the Yehuda Agadah, the same scribe wrote the colored text and the black text. The shape of the letters and tags are quite similar. Slight differences might be due to the different substance, ink compared to gouache colors. While ink dries out mostly on the surface of the parchment, the paint dissolves into it, and therefore the margins of the painted letters are less sharp. They are blurred, as you see here. This is also why we mostly see the colors from the back of the parchment. However, even if the same scribe wrote the black and colored text in the Yehuda Agadah, they were probably not made at the same time or at the same session. Presumably, the scribe completed all the black text first, and only then he added the colored text. Evidence of this can be found in varying sizes of the colored text, apparently fitted to the space left after completing the black ink text. Another evidence, as we can see here on the right, is the diacritical mark of the red text, apparently written on top of the black text. Okay, I don't know if you see it. It's very hard to see, but the diacritical sign here is on top of the black letter. Of course, it is possible that the diacritical marks are yet another session. Okay, they were not done with the colored or the black text, but nevertheless, I think it is apparent that I think it's quite apparent that the black text was first. In contrast, in the second Nuremberg Haggadah, the tags underneath the letters were designed differently. Here, the color letters, especially in the initial word Erev, and the general appeal of the colored letters is more angular. Hence, it is quite possible that here we see the work of two scribes. One wrote the black text and another made the colored text. Although most colored texts were made using a quill pen, there are examples of letters that were not written but painted using a brush. These fall into two primary groups. The first group contains elaborately decorated initial words. It is probable, yet not certain, that these were made by the craftsmen who colored the marginal paintings. For example, in the initial word Kama, in the Yehuda Haggadah, that we see here, there's a use of the same blue, green, and light brown pigments and the black contour, like in the marginal paintings. The craftsman also used the same white color covering the figure faces to erase something here behind the letter, but I'm not sure that the white is original. In contrast, the red pigment inside the letter does not appear in the illustrations on the margins. And there is a use of here of yellow that does not appear inside the initial words. Nonetheless, this can be considered further evidence for making the miniatures and initial word by the same craftsman, who viewed both as integral part of the coloristic composition. Therefore, he probably colored the miniatures and the initial words in the same session, during the same session. Another group of text made by a brush contained initial words too large to be written by a quill. These differ from the quill-written initials in several characteristics. First of all, their shape is not planed, and the bases and roof's thickness is not fixed. Second, one can notice a high pigment density in the letter's margins. Okay, you can see it here on the margins, compared to the low density inside the bases and roofs. The density of the pigments towards the border areas indicates that the painter worked on defining the shape of the letter and invested most of his efforts there. It is possible that he used a wash technique common in working with liquid gouache, wetting the parchment in the designated area before applying the color. Therefore, while painting the borders, thin paint dissolved into the center of the letter. And this is, of course, in contrast to letters that were made by a quill, but don't have this change of color from the border to the center. The brush-made letters are square Ashkenazi script, like the letters made by the quill pen, both in black and color. Nevertheless, different handwriting is apparent in the initial word. The letters are not inclined, and some of them are decorated with colored round shapes in the middle of the letter's leg. For example, the bet here. Okay, here you see the decoration. This feature resembles the elaborately decorated initial here, which was painted, not written. So I guess it was the same artist who made these two kinds of painted letters. It is more probable that, therefore, it is probable that were not made by the scribe who wrote the other text on this page, but more probably they were made during coloring the marginal illustrations, since they share the same color palette and participate in the pictorial and color composition. The black contour around the letter Ain here was probably added at the last session of coloring, along with the illustrations color contours. Okay, it's the same contour. There are critical marks, and you see, I'm sure you're looking like this now. So the end is near. Okay, so there is a lack of uniformity in the use of diacritical marks. The primary signs, upper and lower lines, appear consistently. In contrast, the dagesh was not consistently painted in both Agadot. The diversity implies different craftspeople creating these texts. In this example, they also used various text shapes, further underlining this possibility. So I want to conclude. In this paper, I tried to deepen and expand the discussion on craftsmen's varied activities in the workshop producing illuminated manuscripts. Unlike most or many discussions on the topic, I ignored the separation between painting and writing, and between a scribe and a painter. Instead, I investigated the text according to the working methods which are apparent on, in the manuscript. I found that the text made in the Yehuda and the second Nirei Haggadah can be divided into two categories: a group of texts written by a quill containing black and colored examples, and colored text painted with a brush. Distributing these texts into the two groups redefines the working processes of producing illuminated manuscripts. Instead of the traditional order, laying out the drawing, writing the text, and colorizing the illustration, I suggest laying out the drawing, writing the black text, writing the colored text, painting and colorizing the text and illustrations, and then adding the contours. Based on the very text shapes and subtle differences of letter shapes in the same text form in the two Agadot, it can be determined that a team of craftsmen worked not only on the coloring, but also on creating text in these two Agadot. This flow chart blurs the boundaries between scribe and painters, and I suggest to view them as versatile craftsmen working in the workshop. Moreover, comparing the two Agadot presents worker craftsmen as not always working according to pre-written protocol. They did not perform monotonous work. Instead, they were allowed, perhaps even encouraged, to improvise, change, and innovate during the copying, and had aesthetic awareness. These qualities and abilities, usually attributed to master craftsmen, seem to have also characterized other workers in the decorated manuscript industry. Thank you.
I was muted. Thank you very, very much, Tzvi. Really fascinating. I have a question, but I want to start with the participants. I think the first question is from Andreas. We'll follow the order of the questions on the chat as we did before. Andreas Leonards asked the following to Mark. How long do you think did it take for a Jewish scribe to write a complete Torah scroll in the Middle Ages? And how many animals with their skins were needed approximately for one complete Torah scroll? Mark?
Yes, so I can tell that I think it's not a different answer about medieval scribe and scribes of today, because today it can take about 1 year, but if a scribe is writing faster, it takes him less. If somebody is writing slower, it takes more. For example, now I am almost finishing one. It took me more than I was planning. I think 1 year is normal, but scribes who write much faster than me or than that. I mean, and how many animals? So today, so the Torah scrolls is sewn together from sheets, and the sewing is done by also animal-based thread made from the sinews of the kosher animal. So today things are very uniform. I mean, standardized. So in the older scrolls, you had very different numbers of columns and also different line numbers. So I can tell you that today, because it's standardized, it's standard. So modern Torah scrolls today is usually written on 245 columns, and it's they use for that 62 sheets. So 62 sheets means 62 animals. If they had more lines and higher columns, then it can take less. And if it can take a little bit more, a little bit less, but approximately this is the number. So big herd of, actually not really herd, because today and also the medieval times, unborn calves are also used. So because their skin is also by non-Jewish scribes it was used because their skin is thinner, finer. So the herd is maybe not a correct word for this, but lots of animals.
Fetus you're talking about.
Yeah, fetus, yeah. But the older scrolls, like in the medievals, it was more common that it was done on calves that are already born.
Again, I would, you know what, I'll ask you just a small question. At Leeds University, the International Congress, you mentioned that, what we know, that in the Middle Ages, they didn't have tagim, the serifs. And you showed some of them here.
Yes. So what is the question?
No, I'm saying, do you think that they were added later?
So you mean, I tried, so in the certain manuscripts, certain Torah scrolls from those times, and especially older Torah scrolls, older than the Erfurt Torah scrolls, you can see clearly with, especially with infrared photos, taking infrared photos, you can see that they were added later because the different ink was used. Also, the original script usually did include something that it meant to be ziyunim, it's called in the Talmud. The corners of the heads of these letters were considered the Zionim, and later on, probably we have no time for showing illustrations of this, right?
No, I would just.
When the head of the letters turned because of aesthetic reasons, before it was more diagonal, then the corners were actually these Zionim, and later there was after it was straightened, there was a need to add those little lines.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Welcome.
Maximilian Ofters. I hope I quote the name correctly. Question to Mark. You briefly mentioned writing in stone and the sculpturing of letters. Do some halachic rules and customs for writing on parchment or paper also apply to writing on stone? Is writing on stone considered writing at all in the halachic sense?
I don't remember that I mentioned writing on stone.
No, you mentioned writing on paper. The question is it, what do you think will apply to writing on stone?
Well, halachically speaking, a Torah scroll cannot be written on, or a mezuzah or a tefillin cannot be written on stone. It wouldn't be halachically, it wouldn't be considered kosher, halachically speaking.
But you know, it will be kosher to write a get on stone. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's
right.
Another question. Oh, this is the tzvi from Maria Jusebecher. Are there any hints to the names of the producers of the Yehuda and Second Nuremberg Haggadot?
Well, not yet. Maybe I should try to find the letters. I already started to add letters and find Rashi Tevot, but no, not yet. We don't know the name of the scribe or the painters or the workshop, the master craftsman. Not yet. I hope, maybe one day.
There is a comment by Akiva. Clearly, the scripts to Tzvi, right? Clearly, the scripts are different and written by different people. Do you have anything to add? I mean, you mentioned it already.
Yes, you can see scripts that are really identical, but you can see that others are different. So, yes, it's sure that a team of craftsmen, of scribes made the text in the two Haggadot. Yes, I agree.
Okay, another one from Maria Stutzebecher. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Another one for Tzvi. Do you think it will be possible to do analysis like we heard of in the lecture of Suzanne Wiesmann and Haida Liang in Leeds? Lecture titled The Confirmation of Identity, Uncovering the Working Methods of the Artist Scribe in the 15th Century Hebrew Prayer. Do you want, Maria, do you want to explain yourself better?
You understood me.
Yeah. Yes, I remember the lecture. It was fascinating. And when I worked on this lecture, on this paper, I really thought about the lecture we heard in Leeds, because I'm so, I really want to know, for example, if the ink that was used for the contour lines was the same ink used for the letters, for the black letters, and if the colors are really identical in the marginal paintings and the letters. So this can be done only with the help of such technology. And since one Haggadah is in London now and the other in Jerusalem, I think it can be done. We only need a little thing called money, I think, yes, and I think we should. I think it should be done, and I really want to do it.
Okay, we have a question from Vera Henkelmann. A question to Tzvi also. Can you say something about the use of gold? Did the painters make the gold overlays, or were there craftsmen specializing in this, gilders? And can you determine whether the highly reflective gold was reserved for certain motifs that were to be emphasized and ennobled in a special way with it?
Okay, so the first question, I didn't quite understand it.
Do you want me to read again? Can you say something about the use of gold? Did the painters make the gold overlays, or were they craftsmen specializing in this?
Okay, so according to what I see, because I didn't have the opportunity to see both Agadot in only the photographs, but the gold is made of leaves. Okay, it's gold leaf which were attached to the parchment, and yes, there are some of them are just for decoration, but others have a real purpose. For example, in the first page, there is an illustration of people bringing the water, Mayim Shelanu, and the water are covered with this gold. And this is according to some midrash, which I don't remember right now, but I can check it. And if we talked about leads 2 years ago, I demonstrated how these golden decorations, for example, in the pages that refer to drinking the cups, the 4 cups, they just help the readers to locate themselves in which cup they are, because in the first cup there is one decoration of gold in the page of each kind, and it's the second cup there are 2, and the third cup there are 3 decorations. So it is very interesting how the craftsmen used the gold because it was dark, and the gold just was the best thing he could do. The gold is seen in the dark, in the light of candles. Okay, so when the audience sees 3 gold decorations, they know that this is the third cup.
Fascinating, thank you. There is a comment by Akiva, I don't know if you want to relate to it. In producing this kind of object, there is a clear preference for each exemplar to be unique. Therefore, it makes sense that the craftsman will be encouraged to innovate the details not defined by tradition and law. You want to add anything to it?
Yes, of course. And, but although it was a shelf product, it wasn't produced for someone. Nobody ordered it or paid in advance. But nevertheless, yes, the medieval philosophy encouraged one-off products. Not this, of course, changed 100 years ago afterwards, or even less when the philosophy of press just it's a new thing. It wasn't something that medieval that was they didn't do it in the Middle Ages. The production of equal of the identical products. Yes.
Thank you. From Naomi Sarig. The printer Avram Konet from the late 15th century of Mantua included in colophons of books. He produced the line, "Hakoteh b'chama kulmusim b'lo ma'aseh nisim." That means the one who writes with a few quills without a miracle. This is not only proves his previous profession as a scribe, but also illuminates your example of using numerous quills. He's actually emphasizing the fact that that he is using several quills simultaneously in the act of printing. And then the next question by Naomi, you have now mentioned another sister Haggadah, the Hilek and the Bilek Haggadah. Why?
Okay, so thank you, Naomi. Of course, you are right, and I didn't mention this Haggadah because it's of lower quality. I know a version of low quality, so I wanted to use only the two Haggadot that I can really look into. But I will, if there is a higher quality photographs of the Hilek Bilek Haggadah, I would surely want to use them. And thank you for the remark about the quills. Fascinating.
If there is no other question, I want to ask one thing. You pointed out with these animals inside the letter. I'm asking Tzvi, who do you think that drew the borders of the letter? Can it be that there were two people, that the scribe made the borders and the one that made the illumination drew inside?
Just a minute.
Even here, you see?
Yeah, yes. Just like to go, I think this is a better example, right?
Right.
Okay, so I think it was done like the rest of the Haggadah. It was located in the first stage, and then also drawn, and then colorized, and then the contours were added. And it should be mentioned that this is maybe older model. Okay, so compared to the marginal paintings, which are also not very new when the Haggadah, they weren't very new when the Haggadah was made. This is even older.
I think, may I just interrupt for half a second? We do have instances where only the contours of those large letters, those initial letters or words actually exist, and no filling in was done later on. So maybe we are talking about two phases.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. I think that I'm talking about this workshop. So in this workshop, I think it was done like the other examples here. But of course, yes, each workshop had its own order of doing things. So, so yes, I think you're right.
Are we done? If there is any more question, we have 10 more minutes, but if not, I think we should conclude. I want to thank both speakers, Micha or Mark and Tzvi, or God, for these beautiful presentations. I personally love these graphic examples. So thank you both very, very much. And I think we're all looking forward for a beautiful presentations tomorrow. So thank you very, very much. And thank you again for all the organizers.
Thank you very much.
Sarah and Adi, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, everyone. We will be happy to see you all tomorrow at 10 also, 10 Israel time.
Andreas, did you want to mention the what will happen after the concluding session again, and then I'll send the link.
Right. So after the concluding session on Wednesday, we will send out a link to all of you and everyone who wants to join, not just the speakers and chairs, but also all the listeners are very much invited to join us in a room, in a chat room called Wonder Me, where we can meet in little groups and discuss. And we try to make up for not meeting in person by creating this room. And you will get the link on the last day. So while we focus today mainly on book production, scribes, book binding, and illumination, in the next 2 days, we will go into very many other different crafts done by Jews. And I'm looking forward to this. See you again tomorrow, 10 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone.